Good morning instead of evening. Today is the Tuesday, July 25th, 2023 Lakeville Select Board meeting. This morning we have with us all members of present. We've got members Fabian, Carboni, and Day. We also have Town Administrator Ari Sky with us and special guests, Ms. Katie Gilfeather from All One Health, is it? Make sure I got that right.
Yeah.
So you'll notice we're a little different configuration today. Today's kind of an off-schedule meeting where we decided to break away from all of our traditional business and focus on a few items that we've all kind of talked a bit about over the last few months, where we look a little bit more kind of into the future and bring up, to the table things that, we all feel very important to the town, not just while we're here, but, even while we're gone, that we hope to see established. And Katie has come to help us through that. I'll let you speak for yourself and some of the offerings your company, which is on contract with Lakeville, offers, and how you've done this with others in the past.
All right, thanks.
So welcome.
Thanks. All One Health is, if you could summarize kind of what our mission is, we're the human side of doing business, the ways that we help organizations work together, employees to work together, select boards to work together. A lot of what the work we do is in team building and assisting municipal government as a huge percentage of the work we do in Massachusetts through Maya. And we're really about not only helping the individual employee, because I think a lot of times people think of us as a resource for employees who are having personal issues, but we're also working with organizations as a whole in areas that affect smooth operations, the people side of this. So our organizational development service, of which this is coming under organizational development, is we're here to serve. We're here to serve you and to assist you. I will speak in a moment, if you will, on what the role of a facilitator is.
Sure.
But really our work is about helping towns and cities with strategic planning, team building, working well together, all of those, just anything that relates to the human side of doing business. So that's All One Health, and I thank you for inviting me in.
Yeah.
We're glad to be here.
Happy to have
Yeah.
you. Do any other members today have questions for Katie before we get started, or should we just dig in and see where we end up?
Dig in.
All right.
Dig in.
So agenda item 1 was to go over, and it was interesting when the agenda got posted, was just kind of going over the Town of Lakeville Statement of Values, which was, I believe, March 2022 was when it was adopted by select board. So Leah and Lorraine, you would have been both part of that. So I would have been new to this. And it really was, an effort that board went through to come up with, the areas that the town as a whole will try to conduct business and what will go into decision making and such. And I know you had a big part of helping with this as well. I didn't know if we wanted to literally just read through this, or if there's anything people wanted to suggest as changes, or just kind of speak to how we ended up with this in the first place.
Is it possible that I could respond to that already, in terms of the work that...
By all means.
So one of the areas that we work a lot with as an organization is obviously conflict, and how you deal with conflict, how you deal with disagreements, how you prioritize where you should be focusing your attention. And core values, I worked extensively with the city of New Bedford a number of years ago, as did Ari and a number of other individuals, to develop kind of it's a roadmap, if you will, for how you even make decisions, how you run your operation. It actually has a larger impact than I think a lot of people think of it as. Core values are just, these are feel-good statements that people make in organizations and they post them on the wall and that's it, and everybody's like, yeah, we have core values. But what I have found as a consultant is that, when municipalities grab a hold of this and they really look at it as a roadmap for how you're going to interact with each other, how you're going to conduct business in general, it allows individuals to step back and say, okay, this is what's expected of me. The how we do what we do. How do we do the work that we're actually doing? I think a lot of times we dive into the what needs to get done, like the business of the day, what needs to get done. Core values allow us to step back and say, So this is how we're going to conduct our business. And in my experience in consulting with a number of municipalities that have developed this, and school departments, I've worked with schools and private industry on core values, it's allowed the employer or the entity to kind of point in a direction that we're all looking at together. So what does something like respect look like? How does that work? How does that impact how we handle and interact with the public, for instance? How does that inform performance reviews when you have somebody who's not skilled at interacting with respect? You know, how do we look at these? So my point is that this is has a capacity, if you want to use it, for informing the how you do what you do. And that's why I think it's really important for teams to come together and look at this and say, does this represent what we find of value? Do we agree that this is how we want to work together? Is this how the town, are these the values that the town embraces as how we conduct business, if that makes sense?
Okay. You know, one quick comment, if I may. I mean, our team, kind of being the top executive board, I guess, if you were to compare it to private sector. I mean, especially in the teamwork item, I mean, we've got so many other boards, committees, things that we have to integrate with that, I mean, it can be difficult. You know, all of us have different views on what's important, what's not, and whatnot. So I think, you know, anything that we gain today to help us strengthen some of those and, you know, figure out what that goal is that we're all working towards would be great.
Yeah.
And where we're all elected, I mean, the individuals change over all the time.
Sure.
So it's like you're constantly trying to,
Yeah.
you know, reset the goalposts and figure out what you're working with.
Yeah, well, the beauty of that with core values is the core values should be basic enough that they stand the test of time, that the core values don't get rearranged constantly, that you say, this is kind of guiding principles for how we work together. This is guiding principles for how we evaluate people's work performance. You know, because over and over again, we hear stories of employees, they're a great employee, but they just can't get along with people. Well, does that make them a great employee? You know, they do the work, but they're just constantly creating conflict. We hear that all the time. You know, so these values should be timeless enough. It doesn't mean you don't go and revisit them and maybe revise them over time, but they should be an enduring set of guidelines or principles for how people work together and how you decide about what makes sense for you, which is why I think it's important that this be on the agenda is, you know, do you agree with this? I mean, it would be important to have a discussion about that.
Yeah, does anybody have any comments at this point? And then, I know the two of you were a big part of putting this together in the first place.
Well, I think that Ari and you know, his team with the department heads, you know, worked diligently to come up with this. So there was buy-in, you know, at that level for management as to what they wanted to see in their environment. And, you know, when this was brought up to the, you know, to the select board, you know, we certainly adopted it because the work had been, you know, put into it. You know, it's a start.
Weren't you part of them putting this together?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, you know, so I know a lot of work did go into it, but when you look at the date of the adoption of this statement of values, at that time, we knew we had a big issue coming up. Even though we tried to anticipate the emotion around it, that was one of the biggest issues, again, that the town has ever, you know, faced. And no matter what you put down on paper, sometimes as much as, you know, you're talking about civility and cooperation and everything else, emotions,
Oh, yeah.
the public's and ours, because, you know, we know a lot more sometimes than we can, you know, say, or we know it sooner, so we have more time to digest it before it goes out to the public. So that was a really, really, really difficult time for everyone at Town Hall, for the people of Lakeville. So sometimes I think, you know, even though we try,
Yeah.
You can't always necessarily, and as a matter of fact, I was paying attention, both of you a couple of times said, we try. So I think, you know, these are great values, but, you know, it's still, there's no perfection here, you know? Emotions do get in the way, and for some folks, especially on some of these issues that we had last year, these are, you know, anything to do with, you know, a particular piece of property is a 30-year issue in town. We're not the first select board to deal with it, and we probably won't be the last. So sometimes emotions just do. So I'd like to stress that, you know, this is an attempt, you know, and we keep this in the back of our brain. And I think, you know, most often everybody does a really good job of sticking to it, but there's definitely, you know, even in our weekly meetings sometimes where someone feels much more passionately about someone else, and, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, great point. I think it's an ideal, is what you're saying. Is that what I hear you saying? It's an ideal. And sometimes it can also be a tool to address when you're in the midst of high emotions, right? And people are really, and now it's starting to feel personal, because that's where, you know, there's a lot of research that says, you know, when it gets personal, your brain gets activated and you're not listening anymore. Now it's personal, right? And it's, you know, there's brain science to this. The little amygdala gets activated, your logic shuts down, and we've all seen that, right? Where people are now just going on and on and on, and there doesn't seem to be much logic to it. The values allow you to step back and say, can we hit the reset button here? This doesn't seem to be working. I'd like to carry this conversation forward with some respect, you know, for both of us or for all of us. Or, you know, I can tell that you feel deeply about this issue and we really want to hear you. And, you know, we are accountable for the outcome of this. You know, so you can point to the values sometimes to help the conversation reset itself. And I've seen that, and it gets it out of you and me and more into, this is how we ascribe, you know, to do our business. Let's see if we can reset and have this conversation, because I really want to hear you. You know, so it's, again, if you use it as a guiding principle or a roadmap for, okay, this is falling apart here, because how many times do we get into those conversations where you go, nothing productive is coming out of this, right? Nothing. We're just ego against ego, and we all have egos, right? My position's right, your position's right, my position's right, you know, and nothing's happening, right? And so the core values can be used as an effective tool to say, can we hit reset here? Because it doesn't seem like it's going where we want it to go. And you know, a lot of times that does work. It's whether people are willing to hold themselves accountable, to call on each individual role to hold this up as the way we're doing business, which is why it's a pretty effective tool. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But, you know, I think my experience, particularly in working closely with the city of New Bedford when they were starting to put this together as the New Bedford Way, it's been implemented in performance reviews. People are onboarded with this. There's an expectation that this is how you're going to conduct yourself. And, you know, it serves at every level, which is why it's important. I think that we're having this conversation as a select board because it serves for each other, you know, to call each other out. If you're thinking that the conversation is getting stuck and it's getting emotional, hey, can we reset? Can we go back? Let's see if we can come up with a solution. So it kind of helps people calm down a bit, if you will. I know people don't like that expression, but it's a good tool to help people kind of refocus. You know, this conversation isn't feeling very respectful, or, you know, well, however you look at it. Like, you know, when there's a disagreement about the best way to go, what's the best way to achieve this goal that we're setting today or whenever, you know, to remind each other that our interest is the same. We might have different ideas about how to get there, right? And so listening is a huge part of respect. Listening with a willingness to learn. Most of us listen thinking how we're going to defend our position. It's just, you know, that's how we listen. We want to defend her. I'm going to look for the hole in your argument, and then I'm going to, and that's just human beings. I'm not suggesting this is your team. It's just the way it works in human relationships. And I think that capacity to step back and say, I know that you have the best interest of the town at heart, and I know we have a different idea about how to address this. Let's listen to learn from each other. And it just makes things go smoother.
It's interesting. I think this kind of branches off of what Leah said a little bit, where like in our meetings, sometimes you want to bring up facts or information that would bolster anybody's, position, whatever it might be. But then suddenly you're like trending off into like, well, this isn't on the agenda actually. And like, we can't even bring it in. So you then have like this sense of frustration of like, if only we could go down this path and bring that information in.
Yeah.
And then you get hyper frustrated. It's like, well, I guess we're going to throw another 2 weeks away because we have to do it at our next meeting and talk, make sure that's on the agenda and talk about it. So or even interacting in public sometimes, people want like a very specific comment on how you feel about business that hasn't been concluded yet.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, well, if I give you a comment, where are you going to go with it? Like,
Yeah.
are you going to bring it to Lorraine or to Ari or to Leah or whoever? And like, then suddenly they're accusing us of, serial conversation or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even in public, it can be really hard to engage and figure out like, what is the appropriate amount before I'm crossing a line?
Yeah.
Where you just have to say like, I'd like to continue this conversation, but we probably have to stop it here. And then if you want to come, and sit and observe and talk about a subject, we can.
Well, you're talking about integrity, right? Showing integrity to the process and not bypassing the process. So there's an example of a core value, like, in my role, I need to show integrity to this process. And really core values is just the same thing. It's, you have your rules of how you run a town, you have your rules of how you run your meeting, you have a set of rules. That's kind of the foundation of things. And this is kind of a set of rules for the very way that you interact with each other, both here, the whole town, across the town. Ideally, it has to work from the top all the way down. It has to be a buy-in that this is a reset button. This is how we do it. There's a format. If you're bringing up an agenda item and it's not on the agenda, if you bring up an item that's not on the agenda, we have to defer to the next meeting. You're always setting that boundary of, I'm sticking to the rules of how the town meetings run. I'm sticking to the rules of how we interact with each other. I'm sticking to the rules of my integrity. So I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying I have to show integrity to the town. So it gets it less personal. It's a real tool to step out of the personal and more into, this is the structure we operate under. And I need to show the town integrity by not having this discussion with you. So it's not even about you and I, it's about me showing integrity to the town, if that makes sense. And you can point to them, you can talk about them all the time. They're, I don't know if we want to take the time to go over them and just look at them for a second and.
Well, I was just kind of looking a little bit here, but I will say, knowing that this started at the department head level, I will say that, on a day-to-day basis, I do see them executing a lot of these, which is really nice.
They take it very seriously.
Yeah, there's so much teamwork that we hear about and whatnot, and people come to you when things do get messed up and own it, so that we can go back and fix it. So before we get too much in the weeds, I think it's, I just want to say thank you to the department heads that started this process really and are adhering to it.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of work went into this. There was a lot, Ari, I don't know if you want to add to this, but just at the end when people read out loud in the department head meeting what they stand for, there was a lot of pride.
A lot of pride, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very organic process. They all kind of broke into their groups and we gave them a little bit of guidance in terms of what a value statement looks like. We didn't really give them substantive guidance. And they kind of came up with these core values themselves and chopped them around the group. And I think we may have had at one point more values than we had room for.
Yeah.
Kind of culled it down a little bit to try to boil it down to core,
Yeah. Yeah. And they went to their department, their employees, correct? And got the employees. So it wasn't just something that was handed to. The employees had valuable input too.
So I have a quick question. So how, it's written on paper, so how do you bring it into behavior and keep it fluid?
What a great question. I think That is a great question. I think it's a matter of, talking about it a lot, bringing it up, for the department heads, training on, okay, now you have these, and you have an employee in front of you who maybe is not being respectful in the workplace, or who doesn't play well in the sandbox with other people. You now have a tool here to talk about, this is important to the town. It's a matter of people taking it as not just nice words, but this is how we're doing business. So I think you have to keep reinforcing it into the operations of the town over time. So in New Bedford, the Human Resource Department looked at, this is part of their performance evaluation now. We're not just looking at how many things you did or what your output is. We're looking at the process of how you work with others. You're being evaluated on how well you work as a team member. You're being evaluated on if you can own your mistakes. I mean, think about this. If you look at these 5 values and you had every employee living under these values, you would have an awesome organization. Anyone would. So we all kind of can get off track. We can all fail in one area or another. But, so for instance, like the example of accountability as a supervisor, why is it important to hold your employee accountable? Why is that even important to you? What is the impact it has on the other employees if you don't hold them accountable? So people start to get a vision of, oh, these exist so that things run better and morale improves and everybody knows kind of the rules of the road. Everybody knows kind of what we're looking for in you as a team member, as an employee of the town. So it takes time. It takes time, I think, Lorraine. That's the answer to that question. It takes time, and it takes this is about building a culture of excellence. This is a step in creating a workplace that people feel pride in. This becomes, these are being adopted by all large corporations. This becomes a tool to actually make the culture a place where people want to come to work. If they are being held accountable, if an excellent employee is doing an excellent job and nobody's paying attention, and a not so excellent employee is not doing a good job and nobody's paying attention, pretty soon the excellent employee kind of slides into a mediocre place because they're not being held accountable, right? It's just human nature. Yeah. And I think it's very, it's a process, I guess I would say, in terms of getting the buy-in of leadership to see their role in holding the standard in place and the value that it has to the whole town and making it a place people want to come to work. Because the number one thing that I work with in individuals is people who work in unpleasant workplaces. And that's a shame. That's a shame.
It must be fun to step into each time.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of times it's that the organization hasn't taken the time to set a blueprint for how we're going to work together. So they don't even know they can hold someone accountable for being disrespectful. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it for you. Yeah, it's a process. I started out my career working with individuals that were having challenges in their personal life. And then I saw more and more people coming in to talk about their unpleasant work environment and what do they want to do? Do they want to leave or whatever? And then for me professionally, I got more interested in helping organizations as a totality look at how to be a workplace that people want to come to work, and that's a little bit of our organizational development services, is how to create a culture where people really enjoy coming to work. Because we know the number one reason why many people hold on to their jobs, even if they don't like the job they're actually doing that well, it's a great place to work. They feel welcome. They feel part of a team.
A question for Ari, do we actually go as far as including this in job postings or anything like that, or is it part of
it's part of the onboarding process.
It is part of the onboarding process? Okay. Be interesting if anybody suddenly scurries away and you don't hear from them again.
I've never heard of that happening. But it's an important part of, onboarding is also a form of, for a better term, indoctrination into the organization and the culture. Yeah. And so it's important for the employees to see, regardless of the level of the employee, to see that, this is what our core values, what the town's all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you notice the larger corporations, when they do put print out about a job opening, they list their core values often. You know, this is a fun place to work. This is a place that respects, you know, and they're putting their value, these are our core values.
Also, I mean, just, fault that a little bit more, just to, no organization can function on autopilot, but they don't function well on autopilot. So if they don't feel like they're getting sort of constant feedback, and if employees don't feel like they're getting constant feedback and guidance from above, then they're going to just do their own thing and do what they always did. It means less adaptation, less innovation, and less responsiveness, and also and over time, less commitment to the job, commitment to the organization. It results in a feeling where the employee can feel sort of like an island. And that's what we're trying to avoid in this culture as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at some very big projects as a town. And, you know, these are things that are going to require interdepartmental collaboration, cooperation, commitment. You know, if this is the culture that you work together, you're not siloed. You know, you're expected to come together to look at these and address these larger issues that are in front of you. That's part of setting that culture and that expectation.
Any other questions or thoughts on the statement of values? Other than I think it's great to go through and have this discussion, even if the board remains the same year to year. I mean, as people come and go too, and then going through that and kind of like, how did we get here and why did we do this is important to understand.
Yeah.
I wasn't here when this was put together, and I think the extra, detail and background and how you've worked with organizations for me is helpful to understand.
Yeah.
Like why they came about in the first place, and
Yeah.
how it turns into a tool that you can utilize.
How often do you think they should be refreshed, Katie? Normally, how often?
In terms of core values?
Does an organization do that?
Ideally, they should be looked at every year. But ideally, your values one of the principles are kind of constant. Like, you have any principle of gravity, it doesn't change every year. You kind of have, principles of aerodynamics, they don't change every year. These are kind of principles. You might tweak the language, but I think they're kind of foundational. I don't know that you have to go revisiting them constantly. You want to look at, is there something we're missing? But I think organizations are adopting these because they've recognized that they needed a tool of, something outside of, I don't like how you're behaving or you're not living up to an expectation. I think a lot of organizations realize that when they have a common statement of values, they have a tool that they can point to guide people into working better together as a team. And this is, frankly, also for you as a select board to take a look at, do you embrace this as how you look at things? Are you comfortable with kind of calling it out if something isn't going well, if a conversation isn't going in a direction that's productive? Are you comfortable being accountable to each other to say, hey, I don't think this is productive. I don't think, can we hit the reset button again? Are you comfortable with saying, I really want to hear you, but I need the conversation to go down in tone. Are you able to do that as a team here? Because you're the leadership, and it does start with you.
So one of the, and I remember thinking last year that we were given just this document to look at, and we weren't part of the process at all to create it. So we were given a completed document to look at, and a little bit disappointing there because I do know at the department head level with the town administrator, there was a lot of time and everything put into it, and we were just given this complete document. Do we agree to it or not? And, so I think the biggest difference, you've referenced New Bedford at least 3 or 4 times now. And the difference is we're not New Bedford.
No, I know that.
So we have a family culture here to begin with. And I don't know if it was Brian or Lorraine, maybe Lorraine that said, our department heads seem to be doing this anyways. They always have, because we were always more of a family. So it's nice to see it on paper, but I think a lot of folks were doing this to begin with because we don't have offices that are 10 people deep. In some cases, our offices are 2 people deep, 1.5 people deep.
Yeah.
So, I think sometimes, the residents feel like we have, 7 people working and we don't, we don't. So, folks like what they do. We have new department heads that come here and say, I love it here. It's nice here. So on one hand, we're, trying to, get more professionals on staff that have specific skills like grant writing and everything.
Great.
But on the other hand, I think it's important to maintain some of these, family values. You even, referenced corporations. I'm pretty sure most of the employees don't have the CEO's phone number on speed dial. So it's definitely a different culture here to begin with than some big, massive organizations. And I think honestly, a lot of our folks do this every day. I can definitely see this as a tool, but something this important in a small town like this, might have been, nice to get an invite that said, hey, this is what we're doing, with the department heads. And it, and it's fine because I believe that this is, good work. And I believe this is the way that many people are already doing their job and holding each other accountable. And, department heads, I know they struggle sometimes when they have, tough situations that they have to navigate through. So it is nice to have it as a reference, but, I do feel like, I had a third of the employees' phone numbers in my contacts before I ever started in town politics. So it's definitely a different, it's not a one size fits all type of an exercise either. So
I think I would like to just suggest a couple things from listening to you. I think one of them is sometimes when organizations are families, it's even more important because families need a way of kind of navigating, being a family therapist, families going to need a form of navigating. And I think the other thing I heard from you, and I'm well aware, I have worked with small towns. I just don't feel comfortable going into the work with small towns. New Bedford's been very open about the work that they've done with the New Bedford Way. And also school districts. I think one of the things that I hear you saying is maybe directed towards Ari directly, that it would have been nice to have been included in the process.
or at least given the choice, to be included, and, that we can, continuous improvement, communication and, but I just think that, sometimes some of these things, just because we're a policy board doesn't mean we shouldn't be involved in, and it doesn't mean we attend every meeting. It doesn't mean, and as a matter of fact, I think with Ari on board, we've actually really gone in a nice direction because there was always it was typically the chair who would attend every single department head meeting. And that, I felt very comfortable giving that up when Ari came here, and we sort of gave him that at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that sometimes we shouldn't be involved, especially with things like this. But, we can.
I'd just like to just state for the record, Lee and I had conversations prior to the sharing of the value statement with the board. I asked her to look at it ahead of time. And then I sent to the board ahead of the meeting, asked her any comments or thoughts prior to us bringing to the board. I believe you responded at one point, said, looks great. Rich did as well at the time. So it wasn't like it was just brought to the board as a fait accompli and said, yeah, here it is, you need to prove this or not.
Okay.
I never did that. That's never my approach.
Yeah.
But we weren't part of the process, so,
And doesn't that raise a larger issue too, that I think is part of the agenda items? It's just around the topic of, how does the board interact with Ari and the positions and the department heads, and what is the vision here about that? And I'm sure you're all going to come up with at various times examples of, that would be, and so it's worthy of a conversation, at least in terms of paying attention to that and, how involved.
So to their credit, I think Lee is very right, that it's very kind of family oriented around here. Given that the department heads are the ones that primarily came up with a lot of this, I won't say the verbiage itself, but the principles that went into it, I think that speaks volumes.
Verbiage too.
The actual verbiage too. Nice.
A lot of it, yeah.
I think that does speak volumes to like, they're saying like, hey, here's how our family operates.
Yeah.
So if you're coming in, you want to be part of the house and get a set of keys, like this
Yeah.
is what we're expecting.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I think all of us here would admit the town has gone through a ridiculous growth spurt over the last 10 or 15 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, Ari's been part of bringing on new positions to expand, you know, I hate saying expand government, we pretty much had to because the town's getting so much bigger and there's new roles, and it's more complicated, more regulations. And as we bring those people in for new roles, here's what's expected of them by their colleagues, at least to start.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm impressed that, you know, our family is basically the one that did come up with these, and that's what they're expecting new individuals to take part in.
Yeah. And there was a lot of pride that I saw in the department heads over what a beautiful document this is. You know, each department head who was the head of that team, like we're going to define respect, got up and read it. And it was quite moving. People were really very, very proud of this is what we represent. This is what we value. Yeah.
And to my point, we didn't get to see that. So that's kind of my point to Ari. It's not that I'm afraid to let him do his job or anything like that. That would have been great to see, you know. You know, so, you know, sometimes I feel like I just want to see. I feel like I missed out because I know a lot of these people. I've known them for 30 some odd years and they're great people. And it was our department heads and the strength of our department heads that carried us through COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and them taking care of each of their departments and, you know, so I know, and that's where that's coming from is, you know, it's a small town. We had to listen. We couldn't just do what everyone else was doing we did what we felt was best for the town of Lakeville, not for the city of Boston, not for Plymouth, not for, you know, you know, so sometimes we need that interaction, you know, I know there's a chain of command, but you know, sometimes it's nice to hear from the group as a whole, because then how do we know? You know, like when we move along, you know, to some of these strategic planning ideas, it might be nice to have some department heads in the room to say, you know, yeah, that's not going to work, or yeah, that is going to work. And, you know, it's difficult to do with our open meeting law and, you know, everything else, but we could come up with what we think, and we all agree are 5 fantastic ideas, but then
How doable are they?
How doable
How
are they?
realistic is it? Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
you know, because we are basically lay people doing this job, and we count on professionals in their just like the town administrator counts on those department heads who are professionals in their department for, you know, that exchange of information. So that's, you know, that's really where, you know, where I think lately, for me at least, there's been a little bit of a disconnect. You know, you just can't cut yourself off from, you know, from that type of information, you know. And if sometimes it's, you know, if Ari has to repeat everything every department head says to the 3 of us individually, then, I mean, that's just not productive,
Right.
you know, as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
So-
a balancing act.
Right, sure.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? It's a constantly moving balancing act.
It's not easy. I don't envy him being in that position.
No, you know, I know that Ari meets with the department head group at least twice a week. I know he's told me that he meets with department heads on the off week. And I mean, we need that. We have to be sure that, you know, he has to be sure that everyone's, you know, doing what they're supposed to. And, you know, so it's kind of hard to fit in, you know, some of the needs sometimes that, you know, we have as select board members too.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's definitely not about, you know, wanting to control. It's more about exchange of information.
Yeah, being part of the process.
Yeah, every decision we make is better with more information.
So I think you're bringing up an important part of this. I think it is somewhat part of the agenda because we were talking about how this relates to the board. How do you see that working? And I'd be really curious to hear from your standpoint and from you also, how do you see that working more effectively? Leah's commenting that she is feeling like she wants more interaction and where the intersection occurs between strategic planning and the realities of, practicality and doing the job. How does this board and URA see that actually working better?
I almost feel like this is an exercise in futility because we're going to have 2 more members in a few short months. So,
well, you can also be creating a culture that they step into.
Sure. No,
and that's a little bit of
you're
what I think
absolutely
today's about, right?
But the
What they wanna
nature,
shake up.
the nature of the position is that even if you don't follow, you don't get fired either. So,
Yeah.
And we all.
Bylaw for that.
Right, well, and we all know that, there's, the elected position is, as wonderful as it is, crazy as it is, so,
So you don't think that's a valuable conversation?
not that it's not valuable, but I feel like we'll be doing it all over again, even if we lay out the perfect pathway. And that's what, part of this year was supposed to be, was sort of, trying to prep for that change. Yeah, I think a lot of folks feel like, oh, no big deal, just 2 more people, but it is a big deal.
Oh, it's going to change.
It
the
changes
fabric.
the level of every, just creating packets for us before our meetings, some folks want it digital, some folks want it on paper. You have to print it all, getting folks to come in and sign things, and, it's far more work for the staff and, and we've all said that we're, trying to be very respectful of that, but, I feel like we could put in the most perfect plan ever, and then,
I think that where I'm focused as, just a facilitator, and again, a facilitator's role is not to create the content of this discussion, it's more to move the discussion along. I just really want to point that out. And I think when you take an aerial view, that's part of the role of facilitator, kind of, don't get so into the fray that you can't take a look up. I think the things that we're talking about are foundational and ideally should apply. I mean, again, principles apply whether it's a small town or a large city. It may look a little different in how it gets worked out, but it's an overarching, it's not, well, we do it this way in Lakeville and we do it that way in, Freetown or whatever. It should be something that stands the test of time and stands the test of change in leadership. It stands the test of change in town administrator. I mean, it should be something that ideally elevates the town and the way we do business. So we don't want to get so into the weeds that we get into, okay, if there's 2 more people, what's that going to look like? What we're talking about at this moment is what you want as a board from Ari in terms of involvement and where they're making disconnects. And that's going to apply whether there's 2 more members here or not.
I mean, it's like identifying what our role is, right? Because Ari has, a role as town administrator. We are, as elected officials, have our role. But it's the infrastructure, and how does that look and how does that flow? Because, information sharing is important, I think.
Yeah.
And, we're been in town for a long time and we do know each other very well as far as, the staff. But at what point, does it become, still, friendly versus, part of an organizational structure? I mean, you'll always be interactive and friendly and, sharing things, but at what point do we as a board allow things to happen without our involvement in day-to-day stuff, I guess?
Yeah, so it's more informal, right? It's always friendly.
Right, always.
But it's, when is this a formal conversation versus when is this an informal conversation? Yeah.
Right.
And if I tail on to what you said there a little bit, which is like, again, back to small town family. Like, there's definitely this line that I don't think is ever easy to draw in the sand to say like, okay, just run with it and do it versus, okay, you need our involvement. It's this weird blurry thing that we'll always evaluate. But like, it's also very easy for any of us to be down at the store or buying lunch or at the field watching a game or something, and somebody comes over and says, hey, did you hear about XYZ? And then you're like,
Yeah.
no. But it's because it's something that you've deferred off, but they expect you to know everything about everything that's
Yeah.
going on. And then it's kind of like, oh, you don't even know what's going on. And it's more like, no, we've tried to let the organization run itself. And I won't know every detail about every little thing going on because we're trusting those that we've put in those positions to do those things.
Yeah.
I think it's a very hard balance of figuring out
It is.
where do we go and how do we adjust from the old way of doing things where everybody knew everything because we were small enough to now it's impossible to know everything.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to know it all. It's no
Well,
way.
and that's the benefit and the drawback to growth, right? Because as you grow, you're almost forced, whether you're a Fortune 500 company or whether you're a small town, as you grow, you're forced to be a little bit more formal in the way you conduct your business. It's just what happens. You have to get a little bit more formal, for lack of a better word. It's always friendly, but knowing like as things move very quickly, growth by its very nature means that things are moving at a faster pace. And, trust in what gets communicated, what doesn't get communicated, the timing of it becomes important to talk about,
I'd like to say something. So the greatest challenge in my position is, frankly, the lack of guidance or prioritization from above. I spend most of my time trying to guess what's important. And
from this group.
for this board, and I think I know what I think is important in terms of town priorities.
Yeah.
But sometimes those line up and sometimes they don't. There's no guidance or guidepost for me on that. The past 2 years, I've had TA goals, and I managed to, which frankly I drafted and gave to the board. The board, and then the board would approve those, and then I would report back on the status of those. At this, but the board itself never had a goals document. Says these are the things that are important to us. So, the value statement is a good example of that. I ran with it because, frankly, there was no guidance coming from the board when it came to that sort of thing. So I said, this organization needs that, so let's do something as an organic process,
Yeah.
which we did. And you were there, it was the department heads themselves that kind of pushed it out. We facilitated it, but they put it all together.
Yeah, they did.
And, and I think that speaks to the fact that the staff is receptive, almost hungry for, strategic guidance from the governing bodies. And that doesn't mean this board, that means also probably a lot of the elected boards as well. And, there's some issues there as well that we can talk about. But it's a general, it's all a question of what the board, wants to focus on. The board wants to focus on, frankly, minutia, or really do the job of governance, which is, providing, establishing priorities and guidance and giving and benchmarks for the staff can work toward. I think staff really needs that. I think it would be very helpful to this organization if we were able to do a better job of doing that.
So is that an invitation to the group to have that discussion?
Yeah, I thought that's.
Yeah.
That's what
That's
we
what
were
we were
doing.
Yeah. And I have to just make a
there's the
disclaimer
segue.
here.
Yeah.
I have to make a disclaimer. I am pretty profoundly deaf, and people don't realize that. And so when you cover, I lip read. So when you cover your mouth,
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you. I'm having a devil of a time.
I know.
we got extra chairs, Bob.
And
Well, I don't want to sit and match you.
thank you for acknowledging that. Both of you also have a very quiet tone to you. So, use your voice.
Yeah.
I have my hearing aid. But
And
use your voice.
just to add too, I don't think well, at least I didn't think the last few years were gonna be easy. And in all honesty, even with the difficulties in the last 4 years of transition and pandemic and everything, I would still have to give us almost an A+ in, you know, because we went from having a longtime town administrator who was here for 17 years to, you know, some changes, and with those big position, you know, important position changes, there's a lot of, you know, uncertainty of the staff. And, you know, so a document like this is great because everyone can refer back to it. But I mean, in all honesty, it's very, right now, the last 4 years have been transitional. I mean, we've, like I said, we've gone from this picture to a completely different, including growth and everything else. So there is no rule book. And two, as far as the goals, Ari's absolutely correct. There were no real town administrator goals because the select board used to assign themselves the goals. And then they sort of put the burden of making those goals happen on the town administrator. But, you know, so what we tried to do was give a better, way to actually do a review instead of all just personal feelings on a multiple choice piece of paper, you know, a standard by which the town administrator can be reviewed. So Ari's absolutely right. Those things didn't really exist. And, you know, I think we all have to be, and I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to get through, you know, even the first review process last year, I was in charge, and on that, I give myself a solid mediocre. And again, this year, I think it's a little bit more improved. You know, Brian's in charge of the review process this year. And we're definitely working on it and, working on everything. So there is, you know, we're definitely doing our function. But, and I know the staff feel the same way too. They're, you know, they went from having, you know, things done one way for, you know, 17 years, and the person that was doing them, you know, was doing so much. And I don't think a lot of folks realized how much that person was doing until she wasn't here anymore. So now we're like, oh, we need another process for that. Oh, we need a, you know, so it definitely has been, you know, challenging in that respect. But I mean, I still think at the end of the day, you know, we're not doing that badly, honestly.
Yeah, this process isn't a statement of anyone doing anything badly.
Yep.
It's the nature of change and new times. And I think people have looked back at COVID and said, wow, that was an experience. Hopefully we're beyond it, semi beyond it. Still hearing people have it. But I think that this is the natural progression of the next stage. You know, you kind of lived through what I hear, you lived through somewhat of a crisis moment, as everyone did. But as a town, you felt you rallied around and did this job well. Now we have the luxury of stepping back again and saying, okay, well, that was that. Where are we going next? And I think that's just the nature of all organizations. I don't think it's unique to Lakeville.
No, I agree.
And
I agree.
If I can make a quick comment, so Leah's right, the town survived, right? And that was incredible to watch happen. And again, you know, not just the select board, but the department heads and such really made that happen. It was incredible to see how many, as much as possible, how many services continued and boards were able to keep meeting and whatnot. But like she said, that was right at the time of change.
Yeah.
And I mean, the town's population has gone up 50% in the last decade and a half or something like that. It's been some ridiculous number. It's just finally starting to table out a little bit. So maybe it is a good time to go back and say, like, are the goals the administrator's goals, or they need to be re-elevated to say, this is what we're heading towards?
Yeah.
And then we measure to what those are.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, we're all taking ownership of what that direction is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're segueing into like the actual, what is strategic planning on the agenda or not, but
Well, I think this was an important foundational conversation about what are your expectations of how you work with the town administrator? What are your expectations? You know, Leah mentioned, you know, wishing to be more involved in the values process. How do you communicate that when you're aware that maybe we're not as involved as we want to be? You know, where's that line? And I think for Ari, you know, that's an important conversation. I know I would want to hear more from all of you about what are your expectations about how this is going to work. Is this going to be the board's strategic planning and Ari's plans are going to, for the operational side of it, fit into those? Or how does that actually work?
Is that a question or is that more of a statement of where we're
It's a
going?
question. It's a question. I should have put a little inflection in it. How does that work? Yeah. How do you see that working?
I mean, I see the select board having, you know, goals for themselves. And I mean, I'd like to see every board, committee and commission have, you know, have a goal setting session. You know, once the April election, you know, has gone by, just kind of sit there and say, okay, what do we want to get accomplished, you know, for this year? And then that obviously would tie in line with, you know, what our town administrator would do to support that goal or goals. But identifying what those goals are, because we have day-to-day activity or,
Sure.
you know, that we have to deal with. But looking out, yeah, there's goals. Like, I mean, we set personal goals, I think, you know, January 1st every year, you know, and we might not.
And we revise them by March, right?
Yeah. We start out really strong, but, and then we kind of taper off a little bit and then we start again, January 1st. Okay, it's a new year, new you, new outlook. So, I mean, you know, I'd like to be able to have goals set, you know, by this, you know, the select board, you know, every year to say, okay, hey, what do we want to get accomplished this year? You know, that's going to help move the town forward. That's going to solidify, you know, whether it's financials or, you know, land acquisition or whatever it may be. And then, you know, Ari, knowing that this is where, you know, we're looking to go as a board can help support that initiative and how we get there. You know, outside of what we would normally do for Ari is help support. I mean, he set his own, you know, personal goals. These were suggestions, you know, by him where he, you know, looks for direction from us. And I can see that. It's like, okay, well, how do we get together and say, okay, what is that direction going to be? You know, that we're going to give to Ari.
Right. You're trying to get a response. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but unless we come together as we are now, just to have that discussion, to put something in place, I can see where you might be floundering and say, okay, you know, it's like, you know, any job, you know, you get your job description. Okay, that's awesome. And then you sit at your desk and say, okay, how does that get implemented?
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of look at, you know, finding things to do because you're not really sure. And then you get pulled back because you're like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Or, you know, maybe that wasn't, you know, something we meant, but having goals, I think, will be important for us, you know, as a board of what we would like to see our accomplishments be for, you know, for that year.
So Lorraine, I have a question for you on that. It took more to Leah's point about earlier around, you know, wishing that, you know, people might get more involved, like specifically with the value statement. Do you see it that Ari should be there at those planning meetings? Because just like Leah's saying, you know, department heads have inner operational knowledge and, you know, you can set lofty goals and that's, yeah, okay, I have more information about whether that's an actual attainable goal. Do you see the town administrator's role as being, you know, he should be there? Because if you're setting your committee goals, for instance, Ari may have information that's helpful. Because we know with SMART goals, right? Are people familiar with the SMART goal planning? You know, it has to be realistic and attainable, right? And measurable, you know, so in the end, I mean, we do some great dreaming, which I always think is fun to participate in. We do some great dreaming, but then we say, okay, what's real? Let's bring it down to what is actually doable. It would seem to me that the person that has the boots on the ground in terms of interacting with the departments would be ideally involved in some of that planning.
Oh, it wasn't even a question. I would have expected.
I think what I'd like to suggest is, just like the town administrator meets with the department heads 3 or 4 times a month, perhaps we have a working session at least once every 2 months, almost, without any other business on the agenda, in the same exact way. Because, and now I think I've been the chair most of the time that Ari's been here. And his communication with the chair is exceptional. But, you know, in that way also, it's trying to disseminate information to everybody else at that point. So if I'm busy or Ari's busy that day, then the email to the rest of the board, and we've lived this, Ari and I have lived this for almost 18 months that we worked together as town administrator and chair. So yes, I absolutely knew more of what was going on than, let's say, Lorraine did. And Lorraine did have, you know, that issue. And now that Brian's chair, I'm finding I have that issue too, where, and I know it's up to me to call and whatever, but you know, like the last time the agenda came out, there was a couple things on there that I knew nothing, you know, nothing about. So, I just don't see it feasible in his day or our days, you know, to sit there on the phone and say, okay, well, how do you feel about this? And okay, well, Lorraine feels this way and Brian feels that way, you know, so, and that is the nature of the open meeting law.
It has actually happened.
It happens a lot, right? It happens a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would like to suggest that, you know, at a minimum, once a quarter, and we sort of prioritize, you know, like he could say, you know, we have this values statement exercise coming up. What kind of participation do you guys want to have? And all 3 of us are here. And also, the public will get used to this sort of workshop type of meeting once, whatever it is, a month, every 2 months, a quarter, and they won't think it's something not nefarious, but questionable, or, you know, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's just their planning meeting, you know?
So I think that's a really well-intentioned idea. A lot of towns, I think, do some type of thing like that. I don't think every few months, or every quarter, whatever,
Right.
period of time.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it speaks to one of my challenges, which I appreciate Leah mentioning, which is the question of bandwidth. I could literally spend all my time communicating to the board about everything that's going on, and I would do nothing else. I would do nothing else. And there have been times in the past where I felt like that was what was expected of me. There's quite periods of great frustration for me, as Lorraine and Leah both know. Yeah, and I don't want to go there. You know, the town's wasting its money if it expects the town administrator's job to just be secretary to the board. So, you know, which means that there has to be some level of empowerment or trust going on, and some understanding that the town administrator is going to, you know, be empowered, not empowered is not the word thing of, have clarity, in terms of what needs to be communicated to the board, and what doesn't. And if something doesn't, well, that's okay, it was an honest mistake, but, you know, it wasn't really anything ill intention. And, you know, things, I mean, we're all human, things fall through the cracks all the time. But, you know, in my case, there's just a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of juggling going on, a lot of opportunity for things to just kind of fall. And, it's probably my source of greatest stress, is that kind of ongoing issue. When am I, you know, what needs to be communicated, what didn't need to be communicated, what, you know, sort of managing with the head on the swivel, so to speak. And, you know, so I think that I appreciate that, Leah, I really do. I think it's well intentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it something like, you know, in this initial phase, if this is what we decide to do, we do it, you know, for once a month for a couple months. And then once we've like looked at the entire docket, then we're like, okay, yep, that's regular business. This might be something that, you know, we want to participate in. This might be, you know, I can give you the perfect example. Ari sent us just a very standard update on the Assawamsett School construction. And I put a suggestion in there that, you know, if he could figure out if the other two select board members were interested in doing a tour right before school starts, so we can put eyes on the project, and that way, even though it's under school committee, it's also part of our purview right now.
Right.
So, you know, we could sit in a meeting and say,
I have brought that to them, by the way.
yeah, you know, and just say, you know, hey, here's an idea that, you know, so-and-so came up with, who's on board. If only one person's on board, then, you know, maybe you'll get the next one, so to speak, you know? I just think that it would give him clarity, you know, instead of doing exactly that. He's got to call Brian and say, what do you think of Leah's idea? He's got to call Lorraine, what do you think of Leah's idea? Lorraine's like, well, yeah, you know, I'd like to go. Brian's like, I'm too busy, they can go without me. Now he's trying to make a judgment call, you know, and, you know, he shouldn't be, like he said, a secretary to the board like that, you know, but I just think it would help to clarify, you know, and again, you know, so we may get in our own groove and have 3 of these meetings before the April election.
Right.
Well, then I can see us having a meeting in April, a meeting in May, till we onboard those new, and then we
Makes a lot
spread
of
it out
sense.
again.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, one of the values that doesn't get put on most organizations is the one I was listening to you with, is grace. Giving somebody some grace, you know, and that's such an important quality when we're talking about, you know, things are gonna fall between the cracks. You know, assuming the best about each other, you know, it wasn't a intentional, you know, leaving someone out for, you know, evil reasons. It's grace. It's like, you know, the importance of speaking up and saying, all right, I would have liked to have been more involved in this values process. And also giving the grace of, I get it, you did it, and then, you know, it's a valuable morale booster for everybody. You guys are doing a wonderful job, you know, and you're working, you've all expressed the desire to work closely as a team, to move through issues better. You're all coming at this from the heart place of wanting things to work well and the communication to flow. And this is an important part of making that happen. And so your suggestion is, if I'm hearing you correctly to everybody, is why don't we meet on a monthly basis to start? We can spread out as we get our footing.
Yeah.
With Ari to do more of the planning piece of this and have a cohesion between the board and the town administrator, so there's some clarity around where RA should be. Is that what everybody was hearing?
Yep.
Okay, that's part of what I do is state the obvious, but I want to make sure that everybody's on board with that.
I mean, I think it's a great idea, and monthly, perhaps to start, helps us clear out that backlog of whatever is there, and then we figure out.
I mean, we may not even.
Oh, we're not
need
just
it.
talking about me here, we're talking about,
No,
we're talking about the
I-
organization.
Right,
And what,
right.
you know, what direction you want to see, where you want the organization to see its efforts going.
Right.
And like, my thought would be, out of those working sessions, we come out with, when we say goal, like in my mind, a goal is not necessarily like pave that street or fix that street light. It should be more like, you know, an objective, right? Obtain financial health by something, do this by something. And then whether it's Ari or the other boards and committees, they come back and then say, here's the key results we're gonna have that we're gonna try to hit. We might make them lofty because we're gonna work hard to get them, but here's what we're gonna be, these are the things we're actually be measured on.
Right.
Well, speak to your point, the board could say, as a goal for the next budget, you want to see a CIP that puts more money toward, you know, towards road work.
Right.
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 I think
And then, you know,
some of this initial, like getting the ball rolling, I think will be more about just investigation to figure out what is attainable and what's not.
Right.
And like Leah said, department heads might come back and say, that sounds great, but here's the 14 reasons why it won't work. Like, okay, awesome. Tell us what is reasonable, and we'll work, it'll be a give and a take. But we gotta get there.
Yeah, and I think goals, you know, a lot of times the frustration of leadership in any organization is we're spending so much of our energy on operational goals, you know, maintenance, maintaining what is. And what I'm hearing is Lakeville's in a very interesting, rapid change period where you're also having to focus externally on new development. what's new projects, what's going on, you know? And so you have your daily kind of operational challenges and tightening things up and, you know, policies for HR or things that aren't really new development so much as cleaning up and getting things where they need to be. And, you know, Ari's probably going to be in the best position of anyone to know how much of your time, Ari, are you spending doing, I'm just trying to clean up some things that need to be cleaned up, and I can't even like have the bandwidth, so to speak, to address, you know, this many new development areas. You're always going to have new development, but that's a communication between you, Ari, and the board that's important to have.
Which brings into question timing on some of those discussions, because if you come back to us and say, these are important issues, but I can't do it without additional support staff, for example, like, are those discussions that we would try to have done in the winter to prep the budget for town meeting, to be able to add those kinds of things? Because then we're in that,
Sooner than the winter.
right,
Like the
right,
fall,
like I'm looking
yeah.
to you for guidance on
Yeah,
that. Like,
like the
when do
fall.
those types of topics get handled versus adding something mid-budget?
Right, to your point, that's one thing that I actually have on my list that I wanted to be sure that we talked about a little bit. I mean, we all know that we have a growing town and we can see the call volume of our fire department. And, you know, that's one of my questions that I'm relying on Ari for some, you know, direction. At what point do we say, okay, we don't want a level services budget, we want, you know, and I think those things aren't really the best conversations to have during a typical select board meeting when you have 26 items on an agenda.
Right.
You know, that's
right.
definitely, and again, if he's going to have that conversation, he's got to have it with the three of us at 3 different times. You know, or we take a half hour on a 26 item agenda. So, you know, and I think that's what's missing. I think that's what's lacking. And let me just say, okay, for anyone who hasn't lived the open meeting law with a board of 3 people, it's not as easy as, you know, if you want to try to live, you know, according to that ethic
Side
line.
discussions don't take place. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. And I think putting us all in a room, you know, and just making it public. And you know what? I don't care. I don't care if civics classes come from the high school to check out what we do at 9 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? I think it's beneficial for the town as well, because sometimes I'll get calls that say, well, where did that come from? That came, you know, we'll be able to say, no, we actually.
So one thing that I did in I believe, my first year here, and we did it last year as well, was introduce the budget outlook discussion, which I don't think had ever been done before, I don't believe. Where town accountant, Todd Hass, and I would come to the board, in November with, our very early estimates of what, you know, revenue's gonna look like and what we thought financially looked like, and what we thought was available in terms of funding. We identify kind of the have-to-dos and say, okay, so we got this much for enhancements. If you want to do something, do you have priorities? So I think, there's already that mechanism in there. I have no problem extending that discussion and having further discussions about it. That's fine. But I think it's, you know, I think it's really important that the board be given every opportunity to provide that guidance to staff going into the budget process. The last thing that we want to see is a situation where I come to the board with some proposal for, you know, whatever position, we're like, whoa, where'd that come from? What are you talking about? We never talked about that before.
Do you see this kind of meeting that Leah's proposed as helping to avoid some of that?
I think avoiding surprises is always a good thing.
And I mean, you know, looking forward too, I can't imagine, you know, taking, you know, and enlarging the board to 5 people, expanding the board to 5 people.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
I know what, I mean, like I said, I was the chair for almost 18 months of his 2 years that he's been here. And okay, I'll call you back as soon as I talk to Lorraine. I'll call you back as soon as I talk to Rich. I'll call you back as soon as, and that is, I think, overwhelming. And I, you know, that's not really.
And it puts him in a delicate position too, because like, you're not supposed to poll the audience, right? So
Right.
like there's this like, he can have those discussions and share information to figure out like, should we have this on the meeting or not?
Right.
But he can't be asking like, what would you vote on this? What would you vote on? Like he doesn't
Can't
do
do
that.
that.
Right.
But it still puts him in an awkward position to even have the conversations.
But even just, you know, we were at one point, on creating the agenda where we'd send it out. I don't know, I think at one point we had said something like, if you want any potential agenda items, please have us to them by Thursday before we do the agenda. Then it's like, oh, here's the agenda, let me know if there's, I think that'll
Yeah, it
help
would
eliminate
help
that
eliminate
confusion
that.
too. And again, you know, this has never really been done here. It was a smaller community and, you know.
You got a lot on the agenda, you got a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of.
We've had a couple 4-hour meetings, which are, you know, just overwhelming for everyone, overwhelming for us, for selfishly for us, the town administrator, the staff,
Yeah.
the department heads that come to do their part. And, you know, we try to, you know, Brian does now, I always did try to move the people along, take things out of order so people can get home to their families, you know? And then it's the 4 of us sitting in a room with LakeCAM trying to finish, you know, our meetings, so,
So I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about kind of an adjacent issue, something that Leah touched on earlier, which is that there are a lot of, and I don't want to sound like I'm pushing back on friendships and relationships, but you know, there are a lot of relationships among, it's a small town, among, you know, board members and staff and things like that. And, you know, yeah, those are part of the glue that helps hold this town together and are very important and valued. It can be a challenge for me when when there's sort of individual direction going on, which has happened before. And I'm not putting any fingers in this room at all. Please, I'm not. Between, you know, say individual board members and department heads and things like that. It's kind of part of the whole head on a swivel thing that I have to deal with sometimes. And it can be very challenging. My much stronger preference, and I think the board should be as well from an effective standpoint. Staff doesn't work for individual board members, staff works for the board, and I work for the board. And it's really important to the health of the organization and the functionality of the organization that there be unitary direction provided.
Yeah.
So if, for example, this kind of meeting you're talking about is an opportunity to do that, I very much welcome it.
right, well, that's exactly what it is. And, I mean, you know,
And I'm not saying no board member should be with the department head, I'm not,
right.
I'm absolutely not saying that at all.
Right,
no
but,
direction.
right, but I definitely think that I feel better making a decision when I have information and, you know, if we make it like a workshop, it still has to be posted as a traditional, but if it's more of a workshop type, you know, I guess we can figure out how we work that into Robert's Rules of Order, but, you know.
I left the book at home, it's keeping it, propping a door open.
Yeah, I
This
think.
is just another Robert's Rules of
Right.
Orders in its own way.
Right,
Yeah.
and, you know, I think, you know, I think we can sort of fall in line with that. You know, especially, I know for a fact what I do. If someone calls me about something, I'm always gonna pick up the phone. But the first thing I'm gonna say is, did you start with your proper,
Yeah.
you know, are
Chain
you
of
looking
command.
for me to do something? And, or are you venting or, you know, and 9 times out of 10, I refer the conversation and I have, and that's kind of been my practice because you know, I do think that, a lot of these things are, and sometimes people just want to vent.
Yeah.
And, you know, it never goes any further than that. And that's okay. And at least I don't instruct anyone in any way other than to instruct them to the process. But again, you know, that only works when everyone does it that way,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Can we have an agreement? Are you comfortable as the members of the board to do that?
I mean, personally, with the first department, after I was elected, I went to the first department head meeting to say hi, and I said right to them, like, if you ever feel I'm giving you a direction, just tell me to stop right there, because I agree with that entirely. I think it would be very difficult for us to not want to go to them for information, because they have such a depth of it.
Yeah.
But I also acknowledge that even with 3 is tough, with 5 is gonna be harder.
Yeah.
So if somebody from, you know, whatever, ask one of us a question or ask multiple of us a question, because that happens too. They'll shotgun out the emails or the phone calls.
Right.
And then suddenly a department head has like
difference-
5 phone calls coming in from all of us asking for information.
From a sort of power relationship standpoint, the difference with 5 members is gonna be that 2 board members could meet with a department, could
Right.
to have a
If they
discussion.
think to do that.
Right.
And well, trust me, that someone will figure that out.
Yeah, but I do think though with, you know, with, once we, like I said, we clear out the docket, so to speak. I think everyone just wants, and, you know I'm looking at this not just as me having, you know, being in my 9th year of service to the town. I'm looking at it as having been a brand new selectman with so much going on.
Yeah.
That, you know, sometimes I felt like I was, you know, scrambling on my own, trying to get information and, you know, and I think we owe it to a 5-person board to clear that up.
Yeah,
You know,
which is what I
to-
think the value
yeah.
of today is about, right?
Yeah.
It's about setting some expectations and guidelines
Yeah.
for how you want to conduct your business and what your relationship with the town administrator is going to be, so that when these 2 individuals do join the board, there is kind of an understanding already about this is how it works.
I'm kind of hoping whoever pulls papers in the spring comes back and watches this
This
meeting.
meeting?
Like, do you really want to get involved here? Here's all the intricacies of it.
I'll send it to him.
Thanks, Jose.
The onboarding
Yeah.
package is now a Blu-ray disc.
So please educate me, because I'm, you know, a facilitator, outside person, and I need to understand this process a little bit better. Do you take a vote on that today, that you're going to meet? Is that something that you
I don't think
formalize?
we need a
Don't vote on the agenda.
formal.
You don't,
Yeah,
you
don't
don't
vote on the
want it.
agenda
Are you all
anyway.
in agreement for this? Is this something that, you know?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a 9:00 AM. It could be Zoom. It doesn't have to be, you know, a formal, everyone has to take time out of their morning to get here, you know. And like I said, the more we do, the more the public will
See it for what it
recognize this
is.
as a, you know, a common practice for us and not, you know,
It's actually a common practice for all organizations,
Right.
really, is to.
So
Right.
I have a suggestion, it's just, I was gonna throw it out there. So, the prior gig, not my last one, but the one before that, I worked for a very rural county in Virginia, very small town. It was a county, so the population was larger, but in terms of density, it's very similar to Lakeville, big farming community. And, one of their practices as part of their, they have a board meeting, say I think it was be on like a Thursday night, 6 PM. They had an agenda review meeting, you know, like 12 to something. So the chairman still set the agenda, like the chairman always does. But there was it was almost like a caucus meeting where they would meet and they just kind of go over the different items. They wouldn't take any votes, but they just kind of go over the items and say, yeah, this is, you know, this is that, this is that.
It's like a pre-read.
And it was like
Yeah.
a pre-meeting kind of thing. And they called it an agenda review meeting. And sometimes if staff had to make a more complex presentation than you would normally have room for during the business meeting, you know, the staff would, you know, they reserve an hour for staff to do that presentation. Financial results, could be a development proposal, could be anything like that. And then they'd go into the business meeting and, you know, bang, bing, bang, boom, the business meeting would just happen.
Right.
Because you know, the board would say, okay, you know, I saw it happen where the board would say, it was a 5-member board, would say, yeah, this one isn't ready yet, we can't do this one. Because they didn't have consensus on it, they didn't have a majority. And they would just defer it, they has to come back.
How did the public react to that? Because then
It's
they,
been the tradition in Fauquier County for probably 100 years.
So they were used to it.
Everyone was
So they were used to it.
I'm just
Yeah.
thinking like, the
Yeah.
ability to kind of see the discussion going on and like,
Yeah.
instead of just getting to that meeting at night and then being like, all right, item
it's still a
1,
public
vote,
meeting.
item 2, vote.
I mean, the meeting was a public meeting, it was broadcast and everything else. It was it was in the board chambers and the whole deal. Just the difference was that when they got to the evening meeting, everything was kind of queued up and ready to go and they were in good shape to go.
Interesting concept.
Sharon, may I add something to that?
Sure, Jose. Jose from LakeCAM.
Plymouth does something like this with their precinct captains.
Okay.
They, before town meeting, where they get a consensus from the precinct captains, who are the leaders in each precinct, so they have a vote, so they know exactly how it's gonna go at town meeting. They
Interesting.
do it
Okay.
before every town meeting. Is that similar?
Yeah, it wasn't, this is they didn't have town meetings in Virginia, so it was just a regular meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I think of some of,
Is that, are they a representative town meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
In some cities, in a lot of cities, where they have a larger council, they have committees. Sometimes they're committees of the whole. And they'll have those committees, have a committee meeting, go through this, whatever the proposal is, and refine it, whatever they want to do to it. And then by the time it got to the actual council meeting, the situation was basically baked one way or the other. It was recommended for approval or not, is what they do in Bedford, basically. So it's not an unusual situation for there to be some type of subcommittee process or some kind of review process or something like that, before you get to the business meeting. And then have the business meeting, everything's kind of organized and ready to go. I don't know, it's just a thought, you could also there might be a way to keep us from looking at the agenda every 2 weeks and say, well, do we think it's gonna be a 3-hour meeting or a 1-hour meeting?
Yeah.
Well, that would be a goal of mine, to put forward that we keep the meetings, moving and,
Yeah.
because I gotta be honest with you, after, working all day and then coming in for a meeting, I'm good for 2 hours.
Yeah.
After that,
I know how you feel.
you shut down, we're human.
Yeah.
And, we have business to conduct and, there are some things that, I'm not opposed to having, an additional meeting somewhere, during the month outside of the 2 that we have, but, just to get things, get business done, but 3-hour meetings, I'm sorry, they get sloppy.
Yep. And I've said this before, I
When
don't
they
like,
keep saying the same
To a
thing.
certain degree, you're transferring the time, because you're still gonna have
Yeah.
you might have a lengthy discussion of whatever issue, during this agenda review meeting. It's just a little more free form, and then you're more regimented at the business meeting. Business meetings are literally gonna be vote,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
I was gonna say, I don't know if it's tradition or what, but how we landed on Mondays for select board meetings, because it's like, you get
It used
the,
to change.
you get the agenda on like Friday afternoon, so it's like, well, do I use my weekend to go over this? And then I don't feel comfortable reaching out to people.
I don't question that
Yeah.
for 2 years.
Yeah.
Or then, and then you
Yeah.
come in, you blast through Monday, which no matter what you do for work is no fun at all. And then it's time for another 3 hours at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
try to scarf dinner down real quick.
Mr. Chairman, the previous 2 boards ago was Wednesday night.
So they gave people time during the week to review everything and then be ready. And it also gave them time to unwind. And it worked much better.
Yeah,
But they
I
had
don't-
meetings almost every week.
Yeah, I don't think there's a bylaw that says it has to be on Monday. I think it was just,
It's room
according
availability,
to.
isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Isn't room availability an issue? I mean,
Yeah, but see, what, the other goal, so when Ari first got here, he said to me, what's one of the things you'd like to see? And one of the things was, let's clarify, let's work out what we do by tradition and what we actually need to do. And we found that there were certain practices that, just sort of were taking place. And it wasn't that they were bad practices, but, and one example is we figured out who can appoint their own people. And, the select board was appointing everyone, and even though in some cases we didn't have to be. So what we said was, okay, well, it's still really nice and homey, and we want people to feel welcome to have them come in and say, hey, how you doing? This is us, glad to meet you. So that's more of a, but that's one thing I think we have worked on. And there's a few things that we've actually been able to change, which has streamlined, believe it or not, some of the meetings. So I do think that, going forward, we can work on, but one of the other things I would love to get to is 2 meetings a month. So we pick up a week off in between. And I think that if we have, these types of planning, preparing, workshop type of meetings, that we'll be able to get there.
I mean, in between the end of the second of the meeting month and the first meeting of the month, week, is that what you're saying?
Well, you know how you pick up the extra week sometimes in the month on the
Sometimes
calendar?
it's 31 days.
Yeah,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
so we say, we go to exactly for, and that helps with room preparation. We were going to book this room for almost the entire year on the 2nd and 4th Monday of the month, or whatever it is. And I think we can get there. I mean, some of our boards know exactly when their meetings are gonna be all year long. And I mean, every now and then, there's gonna be something that comes up because it is the select board. But I think it's helpful for Ari, helpful for the department heads, because they know, oh, when are they meeting this month?
Yeah.
When are they, oh yeah,
So it's
oh,
planned out.
you know, whereas if they know the fire chief, police chief has something to bring to us, they know exactly they meet on this Monday and that Monday, or this Wednesday and that Wednesday, so,
Makes sense.
you know.
I think that's one thing where going to 5 helps a little, because right now, none of us want to have a 2-person meeting because somebody's on vacation.
Right,
But if you can at least have 4 people, well, then you got even number, but at least you feel like you're still, more of the quorum is there to talk about business.
Would you have this planning meeting, if you want to call it that, prior, because I hear you saying you're not good for more than 2 hours, and I agree, meetings beyond that are tough, including, I don't know, if people need to take a break, but we can talk about that, but would you do that planning meeting as a separate meeting, or would it happen before a town meeting? How do you envision that happening? Would it
and
be separate?
initially I see it happening as a separate,
As a
until we
separate.
can figure it out.
Okay,
And then we go forward. And then we, you know, have to be adaptable for, you know, we could get 2 folks on the board, one may be on another board and has tons of information. One person could be just from an at-large person that's never participated in anything, who may need more, you know, so, so I think it should be fluid, actually.
And I think it would probably be much easier for us to carve out an hour and a half at home on a remote meeting than being like, okay, when do we all have to scramble down to here?
Physical
You
location.
know, because maybe somebody's off helping family, but they can still zoom in, or they're on vacation, but they're in the hotel room,
Right.
they can still zoom in and still
Yeah,
get
I think
business
it's
done.
probably not tenable, as long as the legislature allows it. I mean, it's probably not tenable to have, multiple in-person meetings like that. I don't think that's gonna be helpful. I'm agreeing with you. I think.
Oh, sorry.
I think that prep meeting being a Zoom meeting makes a lot of sense from
Yeah.
a staff standpoint.
And that's still allowed at least until next year, right? Or did they?
2 years.
2 years now?
25 now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by then, we should have it down to a science.
I hope so.
yeah.
I mean,
Right, you've been
odds
kind of
are
quiet.
there's
What do you-
I'm just soaking it all in.
Yeah.
So, I'll chime in if I have
Okay.
something to say.
All right, that's also my job.
Mike, I have to say shortly, and I didn't want to leave without saying.
Mr. Bob Marshall of Barstow Road.
Street,
Street, sorry.
What? Where the mic was. Sorry, hear this voice. I just wanted to say before I go, I am very proud of this board for coming here and doing this. I think it's a great first step, and I see it being very successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bob.
sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So,
But I know they can hear me too. They can't. Yeah, yes they can.
so part of the, process of doing that planning meeting is, and you're doing it in every meeting you do, but, the role of a facilitator is to try to pull out and get, consensus, or to get a sense of what people are saying. How do you do that as a group? Who plays that role most? Is that your role, Brian, as the chairperson of the board?
For which part specifically?
For the regular, like, workshop meeting or
For the
whatever.
workshop meeting, a lot of times people have facilitators.
Yeah.
Because you almost need someone that has no skin in the game in terms of emotion or view on a topic. How do you pull that off? What do you do?
I mean, I look at the role of chair as, I don't want to say nothing more than, but primarily helping set the agenda, which if either of them were to ask for something, I'd put it on. I don't believe there's been anything we haven't yet. By the time we get into agenda review, the list is mostly set. We might have some tweaks, but not too much. And then run the meeting. Otherwise, I look at all of us as entirely equals to each other. So if we go into a planning meeting, I don't know that any specific person has to run things. If it's somebody that maybe has more information on something, perhaps that topic, they would kind of, chair that topic. If something comes up on COA expansion, that might be you. If it's a fire station building, it might be you. It might be something that Ari's heavily involved in.
Good.
I
of
still
course,
see the role of the chair as important in running the actual
And running
meeting,
it.
because again, you know, if Ari needs a go-to person, he goes to the chair. So
Yeah.
it's a possibility that the chair is gonna, you know new information or,
Right.
you know, before.
yeah, you might have to step in and move it along or something, or just say like, hey, let's follow this up in another one and we'll pull in these resources, whatever they might be.
Yeah, I think once we clear out some stuff, I think it'll move quicker, actually.
Good.
Yeah, I do.
So, Ari, do you want to add anything at the kind of punctuation mark at the end of this discussion?
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. Do people need to take like a 5-minute break and just, we've been sitting here for an hour and a half.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Do that.
We'll take a 5-minute break then and
Alright.
come back. Yay,
you for the
okay.
break.
Good, I felt good conversation going, in our earlier. Just want to get people's input about, are you feeling that we're on target here? Was this productive or not as productive? Or there's something that we missed that we need to cover before we move into the more specific aspects of strategic planning?
I think it's been super helpful. I think we've got some good plans on things we can try going forward, as well as how we can help Ari with clarification and, you know, what the organization expects to do. So I've been very happy so far. This has been a good 2 hours so far.
Yep, good.
I agree.
How about for you, Ari? Are you, is it working for you? And Sure. All right. So, I think the next step of this, the next stage of this is to dive into looking at what's been, thrown out as thoughts. And I'm not clear, so I'll look to you. The first, set of strategic planning considerations, this looks like it's the board's, ideas of what you want to work on, and then Ari, the second is your town administrative goals?
So this is the document Ari shared with us a while ago, right? So it's got the 5-member board, land use policy, those topics.
Yep.
Yep,
Okay, yeah.
I think those were suggestions from Ari, right?
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Yep, and then I know, Leah, you had provided a bunch as well, which I think he's got in the other issues list. And then I've added some other ones of my own, which I think are related, but probably starting at the top would be good and go from there. Unless if anybody else has some other ideas.
which document are we looking at to start at the top? The administrator or the strategic planning?
Strategic planning, I think.
Okay, awesome.
And just to clarify, what do you recommend we try to get out of this? Because we're not we're not voting on any business today.
Right,
I
right.
think, is it just what we want to take out of these to then,
Right.
whether it's the next planning session or the next normal
Right.
meeting, how do we go about?
Great question. I think what the hope would be is that you would establish your priorities and agree on them. So whether it's these three or the other issues underneath, that you would, establish which are they all equally important, kind of ranking them in terms of how important each one of them is. I think it would be important potentially for you to have a process in place when we leave today about how you're going to address this, what is the next step. I understand that you're not voting on anything specifically, so you're not making any decisions today on any area. But I don't think that necessarily precludes you from deciding which of these are your priorities. Are they all equally your priorities? And then setting in motion the next steps. What would be your way of best addressing these?
Gotcha. One quick comment when I was looking at these is there are areas that I would say, for lack of better words, the select board is in absolute control of. And then there's others that will need engagement and participation from other elected positions as well.
Okay,
So I don't know if tackling the ones that we can primarily drive first is better or worse, because I think those will be maybe the ones that we can tackle more short term, and then figure out how do we engage on the other ones. I look at the transitioning to the 5-member as something that we can all probably discuss and figure out what's the best thing to do. And then when we start getting into other areas like land use or economic development, there's so much we can do, and then it's how does everybody else participate as part of that?
right.
I'm just kind of rambling, so I'll leave it there.
No, I think you're throwing out a good question for the group. You know, how do we want to do this? Do we want to take on the things that we feel we have most control over as a board, or do we want to tackle some of the other ones? Which ones, let's go down, let's try this exercise. Let's go down the list and hear from each of you. Which ones do you identify as being the ones that the board has control over and you don't need a lot of outside input? So, number one, transition to 5-member select board. Board policies, personnel practices, logistics, and staff support. Is that one that the board has a lot of control over?
I think that's pretty much all us,
Yeah,
unless I'm
that's all
overlooking
our,
something.
yep, that's
The-
totally our.
Yeah, just to, if there are funding issues,
Yep.
for example, reconfiguration, things like that, staff, whatever, that'll have to go through town meeting. But the select board would be the initiator.
Yeah, because ultimately budgetary, the town votes on it, the residents vote on it.
Right,
But getting that in the budget is all us.
Right.
okay. So that would be one that possibly we could take a look at today, is because the board does have control. Land use policy?
On that one, I think that requires the select board to actually hash it out a little. So that may not be able to get done today because the town has spoken pretty loudly that they want to maintain open space, even at the expense of land acquisition, but not every parcel is the best parcel. Some of them require maintenance that increase the actual operating budget. You know, so I know like our planner, so we have a planner for the first time ever, you know, he sort of has this vision of being able to connect all the open space. So I think that's definitely one that, you know, we need to hash out a little bit more, probably not today. But today, though, I think we should at least be able to decide if it's important to all three of us to hash
Right.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it is very important for multiple reasons, whether we're going to put it aside for open space and use it for some particular reason, or putting it aside as part of a land bank, if we ever need property for mitigating situations, whatever it might be. Now, if we go through like 2A through 2D, purchases, correct me if I'm wrong, is select board, period. Budgetary issue aside, right? Because there's funding.
Oh, yeah, funding, 'cause
But
it's
the
all-
actual execution of a purchase,
Could be CPC.
they're funding though. But
They're
I'm just
funding,
saying the
yeah,
actual
yeah,
transaction of a
that's true.
purchase would be select
That's true.
board. Clarifying-
And sometimes Concom,
I was gonna
Oh,
just ask
okay.
that question.
All right.
So Concom can accept land that's offered to them, but they
Right.
can't purchase land, correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah,
So they can become the
But they can go to the
trustee.
board and say, we'd like you to buy this.
yeah.
Right.
They can do that, yeah.
Yeah, and then we get the whole, you know, something may have a conservation restriction, you can't own it, and only, you know, the restriction, and,
Actually, to clarify, they actually could go to the CPC themselves too. And
Okay.
say, we'd like to apply for funding to do this. They could do that.
Which then goes to
But
town.
yeah, then the select board would have to weigh in on whether, you know, acquiring that land, but
Right.
they can initiate.
So are we tabling that? Because it looks like, just under D, clarify role of MPIC and master plan. Is that the board's
Well,
work, or is that beyond, in addition? There's other people.
bylaws. I don't think so. It's the
yeah,
board's-
so
yeah.
the master plan is required by statute because we have a planning board, if I remember right. Like every town with a planning board has to have a master plan. And then they spend a lot of time and effort to come up with this
Yeah.
every decade or so.
Yeah,
And then once it's created, it kind of turns into what's the execution? Because then you've got multiple different boards and roles that all look at it and have different views. And I mean, I hate to say it, sometimes it feels like it turns into all this work to bring all this awareness, and then it kind of sits on the shelf and collects dust to some degree. Where I was gonna go though is like purchasing would be like select board, but then and then B and D are heavily related because clarifying preservation priorities. we've got parcels in town that are marked both as priority development and priority preservation, like the same parcel. I don't know how
Oh, wow.
we end up saying that. So I'm not sure, would that be
mean,
master
I see
plan or
that
open
as-
space or?
Yeah, so I guess we could do that one of two ways. We could, and once, if we've decided that that is something important, that, we all feel that, the residents of the town, want as well. And that's somewhat true by finally on its third try passing the CPA. So,
Okay.
I think folks are now realizing there's not going to be land in Lakeville forever like they may have thought 20 years ago.
Right.
Because they're seeing it become developed. So, I mean, we could do it two ways. We could save it and hash it out at a work meeting. I hate to use that word, but and invite the planner to that meeting, and actually be able to, perhaps invite representatives from the planning board or the open space committee, but I see that as definitely, I think the most important thing to take away from today is, do all three of us believe that, this is worth putting time, energy, and resources, whether it's staff time or, into coming up with a good plan? I mean, establishing relationships with folks like, I can't even remember the names of Mass Audubon and all these other places where if a parcel comes up for purchase, we can reach out, we have a direct connection to say, hey, you guys interested in helping us preserve, so I think that's definitely a bigger topic, but I think today, from what I'm understanding, I think we all feel like, we want to maintain some of that open space.
Well, I mean, that is definitely called out in the master plan itself, is trying to keep open space in the rural field. They're not, unless you're dumping dirt in the ocean, they're not making more land these days.
Right.
And once it's gone, it's gone. And if we don't have a plan in place to say, that makes sense because of these 5 reasons, and this makes sense because we have this in a plan, we're back to being reactive.
Yeah.
And
So what I'm very much hearing is it sounds like this is an important topic. It needs to be hashed out. There's other parties that need to be part of that conversation. And that may be a priority for one of your working meetings. Is that what you're saying?
oh, I absolutely think so,
Yeah, I think so. And at that working meeting, we call in, at a minimum, the planner who I think at this point has been doing, in the absence of some real direction, has been doing his job the way he feels he's doing it best.
That's actually a perfect example of what, it's a great sort of case study of what we were talking about earlier. Because I think he's doing the job the way he knows how to do it. There's no clarity of purpose in terms of where the planning board's coming from and what they're telling him to do on the stuff. Sure, there could be coordination, I suppose, but there's really there's a master plan, but I don't know whether the master plan is something that, it's unclear to me that the master plan is something that the town has really incorporated in terms of day-to-day, values and I don't want to beat on this too much, but I think that to a certain degree, he's operating in a bit of a vacuum.
Right, because there really hasn't been any, serious direction, any planning. And you know what, again, we're transitional. 20 years ago, no one ever, thought that we would have all the housing development that we do. So, and, like we said, CPA failed twice, so,
What we could do today is in preparation for, on this issue, since it seems like it is a priority, get it kind of, clear for all of you. What would you need? Who do you need at that meeting? What would be the process of that? So that when you walk in that meeting, you're prepared. You're not thinking, oh man, we should have invited this person, or I didn't think to invite that person, or I don't have this piece of information that I really need to get to the bottom of an issue. So perhaps if we want, I'll go down to economic development, but if we want to both hash out number one, because you do have elements of control over that process, but maybe talk a little bit about the land use policy, what do you need in preparation for having that discussion? So that you walk in prepared, you've got what you need.
Honestly, I think at today's meeting, if we have 3 select board members who, you know, are saying we're gonna do our best, you know, we can't make promises, but we're gonna do our best to make this a priority. I think some of the other details, I mean, I have confidence in our planner that he can, you know, and again, back to the improvement, part of our values here, the planning board assigned themselves some goals this year for the first time ever. So I think that that's helpful for the planner as well to get some direction, so, you know,
So
so,
merging those goals
Yeah.
with what your thoughts are.
yep. I don't know that we have to do the specifics today, I think.
No, I wasn't thinking
Yeah,
of that. I was
I
just
think-
trying to think about what kinds of, role are you gonna play as the members of this board in making that meeting a productive meeting?
Yeah.
Who needs to be at that meeting? What are some of the questions that you
What does the
might
agenda need to
have?
look like for that meeting? Yeah.
I'm sorry?
What does the agenda need to look like?
Yeah,
for the
what would an agenda, thank you, Lori. What would an agenda look like for that meeting so that you walk in with your feet on the ground landing?
I mean, if we go back and look at the recent Chapter 61 policy that we just passed, right? For the very first time, we started to incorporate a list of like, these are elements, and that's a whole different process because it's land coming out of protection, but within that, it was, here are some of the elements that we would look at a parcel and say, oh, this is a higher value than one that doesn't have these certain things. So if we as a board can come up with some kind of like, I don't know, scoring matrix or whatever, something at a higher level to say to the planner, to say like, we really want you to go out and figure out, you know, what are the things that the town, or at least the townspeople have said, we're lacking, we're missing, or kinds of land that would provide some benefit. And then go out and say, work with the parties that be, whether it's open space or conservation or planning or whomever it might be, to start identifying some of these things. And figure out what's out there and what's not out there. Because I think, short of knowing what's even potentially available, we may or may not waste human time researching other projects. So if there is no parcel out there that's gonna give us a chance at having a public beach, as an example, like, maybe we don't even waste time going and looking for that. Like, why would we think about that? If there's no way to interconnect all of our different parks and whatnot, like, we don't spend a whole lot of time on that and we refocus.
Right.
I don't know what the list would be right now.
Well, that's
but-
what we're pointing to.
Yeah,
What is the prep that
so,
needs
so,
to
all right,
happen?
so to be very specific, one of the things for me is when the Lakeville Country Club, chapter land, came up, we had one selectman reaching out to all these, natural heritage and, you know, I was connecting with those people through the APC, which is the Escamousa Pond Complex. I would see them at meetings and say, this is going on, or can you guys give us money to help purchase it to offset the cost, you know, whatever. The town administrator's office was, you know, the planner, I think we need to streamline that process. So what does it look like? What does the process look like when a parcel comes up for purchase? Who is gonna be the responsible party? Is it gonna be the town administrator? Is it gonna be the planner? That's gonna be the one that reaches out.
Who's the point person?
Who's the point person?
So what I would say is it'd be very helpful to staff if the, elected officials, so the people in authority in town are able to provide sort of a set of values, sort of values-based guidance in terms of what is, Brian spoke to some degree, what is an appealing piece of land or not. Part of the problem right now is that, every time we come along with either chapter 61 or the acquisition possibility, whatever, so like somebody wants to buy it, doesn't care about the cost and the impact, and others who say, you know, why would that be a priority? There's really it's all just argument in the ether. You know what I mean? It's not something that's based on saying, you know, our list of, you know, we have a list of items that, are attributes that we're looking for in any land that we might want to buy.
Right.
Which would, you know, which would be guidance. That's not determinative, but it does, you know, it's really unfair to staff, and put staff out there to say, well, you know, we have a situation where it's an elected official or someone in the public is saying, you know, well, that staff member doesn't want to buy this property because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to-
Right,
Whatever.
right.
You know, it's not really up to staff to decide whether we want to buy a property. It really isn't.
Yeah.
It should be the board, it should be the planning board, it should be, you know, elected officials and so on. And it should be based on a concrete set of factors that are the guideposts for determining whether we want to buy
Yeah.
something or not.
Right.
You know?
So the board's role really is to develop those questions
Yeah.
that you check off. Does it
Yeah.
meet this? Does it meet that? Does it meet this?
Are we going
So-
to buy it even if it's not on our open space plan, just
Right.
because it's cheap, let's say?
We took some very
Yeah.
early steps towards that with the 61 policy.
Yeah,
So
Is it going
if
to
you call it a
financially sink
template-
us?
If you call it a template, or you call it some sort of mechanism that you have to run, it takes the emotionality out of it somewhat,
Right.
a little bit. Because you've got a guiding set of questions that you have to answer. Do you all agree that that's the board's role to set that in motion? When we consider land acquisitions, it has to fall into a series of questions that meet the criteria for, yes, it's worth buying.
I think that's absolutely the guiding principle of it. I think Ari might have just said it, like, there might be other factors that come into play that we didn't consider.
Right.
And then all of a sudden,
There's
like,
always an
oh,
exception to
that
the
makes
rule.
sense.
There's always an exception to the rule.
Yeah.
But
We can't let the exception be the rule either.
Right, exactly. And I think that if anything came out of this meeting we're talking about, if that was it, that'd be huge progress for us.
yeah.
You know, as I said there, I'm repeating myself now, but I don't know if there was kind of crosstalk going on. We kind of started to go there with the 61 policy,
Yep.
but in a very tentative sort of way.
Yeah.
Now what we need to do is flesh it out and come up with a concrete, you know, set of guidance. This is what we should be looking at. And that way, when we come back, when this happens, we come back, you know, we know, staff knows what analysis to provide to the boards, and the board can make its decisions or whichever, but we'll be able to do that based on concrete benchmarks that we have laid out for us from a policy standpoint.
Right.
Boy, that'd be great.
Yeah, and one of those,
And you're saying you would like to do that today, right now?
No, we're not gonna do that.
No, okay, but
Yeah.
you're liking,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm saying that's
That's getting into the
I'm saying
weeds.
that's an
Yeah.
objective, and that's probably more the function of this meeting that we're talking about. you know?
right. And, you know, I know that we have an open space committee and they're usually very passionate. And I like having them in those positions, but sometimes I don't think they're proactive enough. I think that's another question. We know what some of the parcels are. The planner, who's only been here a year and a half, knows what some of the best parcels are. What type of authority or suggestion do we want to make, you know, to the staff to say, go for it.
Yeah.
You know, whether that means, you know, entrusting the planner and the town administrator to reach out to someone to say, you know, let's put a plan in place where we can purchase X number of your acres this time and in 10 years, so they'll want to work with us instead of saying, well, if I sell it to the town for cheap, then my kids don't get anything. You know, but if we can put together a plan that's sustainable to acquire some of these bigger, you know, but it can't be every property because we're still in the, you know, services business and we have to pay the bills. So, you know, but I think that would be a definite something to talk about as part of what Ari's saying, that policy, you know.
Would you include, once you've developed the series of questions, or I keep calling it a template, I don't know if that's the correct term, but kind of a guideline that you look at. Once you develop those questions, would you then involve the city planner in reviewing those questions? Did we miss something?
No, I
Is
think
there
we
something-
should involve the planner when we're creating
When
them.
you're creating the
I
questions?
assume so, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you
Okay,
have
so
Yeah,
part
no,
of
I-
today's thing is who's gonna be at this
Yeah.
meeting, and that's
Our
part of,
vision as part of the prep work would be that we would come to this meeting with, you know, sort of straw men
Yeah,
that you can work off of.
okay. So what you're saying as a group is you're going to have a hash out meeting, discussion, to develop a series of questions that will set the guidelines for how you make decisions on land acquisition, right? That's gonna be one of your tasks. So you come into the meeting knowing this is what, with this town
Yeah.
planner, this is, and anyone else you identify, this is what the agenda for today is we're going to leave this with a series of questions that need to be answered when we make the decisions around land acquisition. Yes? Is
Yeah.
that-
Yes.
Did I capture it?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, my only
Good.
question on that would be, what's the right way to ask? Is like, do we keep those initial meetings smaller or bigger and invite the other committees in at the earlier stages? I don't know if one way is better than the other, really just asking for discussion purposes.
I think we need guidance, you know, I mean, our planner right now has more experience than the four of us, really. So he's done this and, you know, I think we almost need to listen to what he says before we, you know, say, okay, you know, and I know he's been thinking about it, you know, I know that, he's been thinking about it, but also we have to balance sort of what the planning board has given him for goals, you know, as well.
Yeah, I would say for the record, I misstated a little bit, the planning board did do goals,
Yeah.
but, I don't believe that they were particularly big, yeah, I don't think they really spoke to this question though. I think
Okay.
it's all work, I think it's all work plan type goals. So, yeah.
So I see that as an initial step, and I also see that whole topic as, not requiring, so if someone wants to drop out because they feel that it's being handled, one of us, let's say, I don't see that as a problem as long as, once it gets to the policy, everyone's questions are answered and people have had the opportunity to work through whatever, you know. We certainly know that some of us are more passionate about, you know, some things than others, you know, so,
Well, when you develop a really nice, clear template for how you make decisions, the passion is there, but you still have to abide by kind of the process that you develop.
yeah.
So it offsets some of the, I mean, I know everyone's got thoughts and feelings about what they would like personally, but it gives a kind of a clear view of this is what we're looking at. Does it meet this criteria, this criteria, this criteria?
'Cause I think if you don't put the pre-work in, when the opportunity shows up, especially the 61 stuff, right? Because you're on the clock by the state statute. We
Right.
have to make a decision by X time.
Yeah.
We can't be treading water on, is this a good idea or not, watching the
Yeah.
clock go by. We just need
Gotcha.
to be able to look at it and go, based on everything we already talked about and decided, yes,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
61 is really
It is
a
gonna move
reactive-
you
creates a
into,
reactive
Yeah, it's a
situation.
reactive situation.
it's gonna move you into a proactive stance
Yeah. But-
versus a
But it
reactive.
could also be a landowner coming and saying like, I'd really like the town to consider this, otherwise I've got this other offer on the table and it might not be 61.
Yeah,
And we need to be able to say, yep, hold on.
Yeah,
I have had situations where where a property owner will approach me and say, you know, would the town be interested in buying this? And I was like, just, you know, send a letter
right.
and we'll take
Yeah.
a look at it. You know, I can't. You know,
That's happened a couple of times, actually.
several times.
Yep, and.
Usually
you
the
know,
letter doesn't come,
Right,
but, you know,
so this gives you a process for reviewing it and discussing it as a group. You know. Good. All right, so bravo. Number 2, you have a process set up for how you're going to make this happen. Will that help you with clarifying the role of the MP, IC, and master plan? Will that aid in that?
probably would actually.
I think so.
Okay.
And I think it'll force us to look at it a little deeper and say like what, because that is a plan that hundreds of hours of resident input went into as
Right.
well. And that, on the flip side, it's only updated every 10 years.
Right,
And who knows what the pandemic just did,
target.
everybody's idea of what they wanted and didn't want.
right,
And we won't get another one until for the 2040 plan.
yeah,
But I think it's probably one of those like guiding stars that we can look at it and say, okay, based on feedback, what do we implement, what don't we
Yeah.
implement? It might not be the only one, but an important one.
but it would be one of the questions, like how does this fit into the current master
I think so.
plan?
But it even calls out, who's responsible for certain items in the master plan, which board and committee and commission, and
They're
when was the
crosswalk
last
tests,
time the select board had that in front of us and said, okay, what are we responsible for in this document?
Sounds like this is gonna be a very productive work meeting.
yeah.
And if you come out with a finished product,
probably pretty surprised.
That's gonna
too.
make decision-making that much easier. Yeah. All right. Do we need any further discussion on number 2, or are we ready to move down to number 3?
I'm
So
good.
just to clarify, as follow-up on that item, I will speak with, Mark Resnick, that's the town planner, about, drafting some sort of straw man checklist. After some and maybe to discuss with each of you your priorities on that. And then, he can sort of start to put something together, and we can talk about scheduling a meeting.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Works for me.
All right.
Good. Great. Are we ready to move?
Believe so.
Okay. Economic development. Seems like this might be a priority too. I'm just guessing.
Right, so, all I wanna, not all, but what I wanna offer on economic development is I think we must, not we should, I think we must do a sort of, not PR campaign, but an educational, talk or whatever on the importance of some economic development, because we do have a lot of folks in town that they don't necessarily see the need for some economic development, and there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, you can't have a tier tax rate unless you have some commercial property. And, folks, a lot of what came out of last year was that folks want, residents to pay less, and it's getting some of this information out to why that's not possible unless you allow more economic development in. So I think I think one of the things that needs to be done once we try to find a direction is, just education on, we have to pay the bills. No matter what, we have to pay the bills. We don't just want to hire 3 or 4 more people for our emergency services. We must hire, and we have to pay for that somehow. So, a lot of folks don't want a massive, business here, but we need something.
I would almost expand on, there's an interrelation here possible between land use and economic development. Like, are we at the point where, does the town need to identify, do we need another business park in town? And is there a right place for it or not? Or is that opportunity already gone? Because you're absolutely right. We keep hearing split tax rate, but the amount we have to adjust it to make any dent on residents would probably put a bunch of businesses out of
business, right? Forget that we make them leave, right?
Yeah.
And we've already got a lot of buildings half empty now. So we're gonna lose what little we have.
Right, and is there a way to, I'm not about giving out tax breaks, but is that, Ari would know more about this than I do. Is that one way to try to get some businesses to come to what we already have? That may not be, the buildings.
Like TIFs, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the downside of TIFs is that, first of all, the major issue with TIFs is that they, you're giving up a lot of tax revenue. So you're kind of deciding that a property that may have been taxed, you don't lose the tax revenue on that property, but if a property was already developed, and you get revenue from this business, then the TIF you provide is only going to be on the increment of the increase. So, for example,
I'm thinking more like it would have to be something where we could also get, personal property
It has
tax.
to be something new. So
Yeah.
something like Talbot's, which vacated and now has a new tenant in there. There's really no opportunity for a TIF there because it's the same use,
Yeah,
unless they're doing a lot of work to the place. They're doing some work, but not that much.
yeah. So, I mean, we're still getting the
yeah.
same type of real estate tax from them, but
Right.
the part I'm thinking of is if they're coming in renovating the building, is there any money to be made in via tax through personal property tax?
Possibly,
Or,
depends on what they do.
something like that.
So we're getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, right,
And my job is to be out of the weeds.
Easy
Get
to
it?
do.
Yeah. great questions, great discussion, but it
Yeah.
seems like we could just be here till
Yeah.
all
There's a
hours.
larger philosophical question as to
Yeah.
what is acceptable.
Well, I
What is
think it's the same
acceptable
template
economic
as land use. I think that what
Some
you're
ways, yeah.
needing is some decision-making around how you make decisions. You know, what are the values, if you will, that go into decision-making around, and, you know, one of the ones that's jumping out at me is fiscal responsibility. We're having to offer more and more services to our residents, and we need the income, and how are we best gonna get that? And how, what is the best approach to having that discussion? Who needs to be part of that discussion? Very much get the public campaign, you know, we need education around, you know, we need money, guys, and money doesn't come from the skies, it comes from tax bases and, you know, grants and all the other great things we're doing. But I think that really I want to see you develop a process for how you're going to make those decisions, like what's the process? More than making the decision, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, but, you know, the contributions that I'm making as part, those are things that definitely need to be addressed in that, you know, in that, and for also, because for anyone watching this meeting, you know, we're trying to get information out that, you
Yeah.
know, it's best for everyone to have, and, you know, when it comes time to talking about this, maybe they might say, I think I want to watch that meeting, you know, so we're still, you know, trying to, and that's a tough one. Economic development is a tough one.
Especially where, when we start to dig in and do a little more research here on, you know, what is acceptable, what is possible, that might turn into zoning questions too. And that's a 2/3 vote at town meeting,
Yep.
Yep.
is most of them, some are majority now, but most are still 2/3.
Zoning changes are too.
Yeah, I
So-
think they're 2/3. I think the only ones that were changed were anything with 40B housing.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yep.
So, I mean, that turns into an even bigger campaign of like, why are we really asking to rezone these areas? Is it beneficial to the town in some way without being detrimental in other ways? And like, if you look at our zoning map today, you'd say like, oh, we've got plenty of business and plenty of commercial and stuff. But then if you actually look at what's on those parcels, they're not actually being used for that. Most of the business zone in town is actually residential houses. So it's like, you almost need to kind of show people like, it might look like this, but here's what's actually there. So we don't actually have opportunity for business.
Yeah,
It's already taken up by residents.
yeah.
And
It's a sticky issue.
zoning's never fun.
It's
No,
involved.
it brings to mind though too, so we would definitely need to get, you know, like someone like Nate Darling, who's a zoning enforcement person. But, because at one time, boards before us felt as though they needed, Lorraine, do you remember the name of the committee that had Nate and?
Yeah, it was the
The
ZBRAC,
the
it was
ZBRAC.
zoning bylaw review.
Yeah, so
Committee.
maybe it's time to, you know, resurrect that committee and along with the economic development, which I know Lorraine's been trying to do, but it's like you resurrect this committee to do what? You know, so, maybe we make those folks part of this conversation.
So is that like a whole separate meeting that we're talking about, this type of meeting where you develop,
Probably.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I can see some of the, you know, like bullet point planning coming from us, but I think that more of the specifics on that one could go to the committee, to a committee level.
Is number 2 a prerequisite for 3? Do you need to do that first?
Maybe.
It's probably a prerequisite to start, but almost then turns into a loop.
Yeah.
Because then you might identify something in economic development that says, well, if we only had 50 acres of undeveloped land somewhere in the right location, it would then turn into one of the marks in the land acquisition policy to say, just keep an eye out for this.
Yeah.
And if that becomes available,
Yeah.
maybe it's something, you
That
know.
has to be part of the template for land use, right?
Yeah,
Decisions.
Sue.
And how does this forward our goal
Right.
in terms of additional revenue?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a giant interrelation there.
Yeah,
Of getting the first land use out, I think would be a huge step. And then if we need to add things or manipulate it to support other priorities, I think that's totally reasonable.
yeah, they really do seem like they're There's a lot of intersection there. All right, so we're going to create a separate meeting to hash this out. You're looking at involving Zebra? Is that what you call it?
ZBRAC.
Zebra.
Zoning bylaw review
Yeah,
Advisory committee.
committee, Zebra. Is there anyone else that needs to be involved in that?
I think the master plan states a lot of, what the town wants, the residents want to see for economic development, so
So referring to that as kind of
I
part
think
of it?
that needs to be included. I think it guides us through,
Mm-hmm,
it might answer a lot of, questions out there, what people want to see.
okay.
I think that's as comfortable as that's as far as I'm comfortable going on that one, because I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done on that, on a.
Is ZBRAC, I apologize, is ZBRAC even appointed right now?
No.
So we'd have to-
No, I think I'm still the only one that may be current on the appointment.
Okay.
I'm
I don't
even my
think it exists
appointment.
anymore.
It's
Yeah.
not, we
You
dissolved it.
demised it in 21. I think, right, in 21?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's a conversation that, we have to have with some folks on,
Yeah.
how effective it was while it was in existence. And is it a function of the planning board? Is the planning board better able to do that now with a planner because we never had a planner before? So I think that's a deeper question right there.
I think it is, but I think some guidance from the select board at a town level is helpful as well.
Do you have specific goals related to economic development to increase the commercial, tax base by, 32% over the next 3 years? Have you spelled out
No.
where your
That's
vision
part of
is?
what's missing.
Yeah, I couldn't begin to give you an answer today.
Yeah. Do you see some value in that? In creating a very specific vision of, look you've got a pretty clear idea with your budget. This is what's required. It sounds like it's very important to, keep a good handle on residential tax base because obviously everybody's concerned about that. But it would seem like the next level would be to be very specific about, in order to support the additional need for services in the town as the town's growing, we need to set a very specific goal of how we're going to grow economically, and that our strategy is to develop commercial tax base, and it's by such and such a percentage to offset the increase in expenditures. I mean, I think when you talk about public education, I think that's the kind of specificity, if you will, that people find helpful. We set this goal because we know the expenses are going up, they're going up by this percentage, and we can envision that in the next 3 years, it's going to go up by this percentage. We have to cover that expense, and this is the way we're doing it.
I think it would be immensely helpful. It's how well can we execute? Because, correct me if I'm wrong here, but generally speaking, nearly every kind of development we actually see happening in town is the only kind that is going to increase the need for more town services. There's
Yeah.
nothing coming that's going to offset it right now.
Yeah.
Right now, yeah.
Nothing on the books
Anything
right now.
coming through,
No.
it's just housing.
Everything
Yeah.
is housing, which, nothing against housing specifically,
No,
but
but
people need
it's-
to realize that
It's
I know with one kid in my house, my real estate tax is not going to cover what it takes to put him through school for 1 year.
Right.
Well, and.
Right,
and that's-
the
nobody wants to
paradox-
hear it,
and
but it's accurate.
The paradox is that the type of development that would, the only type of development that I know of that would actually, bend that curve, that would actually provide substantial additional tax revenue, would not have an impact on enrollment,
Right.
is the kind of development that there's been a lot of opposition to.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the paradox, that's
Yeah.
the cognitive dissonance in the town right now.
Which is the reason why I suggest, some folks will always be opposed, but some folks, if they actually see the numbers that we see every day, will say,
Yeah.
I guess I can't argue with,
Right.
you know,
People are visual. they're visual, they get it, like you always see those thermometers work this way up on fundraising, right? Oh, yeah. You know, I think too, if the idea is to try to do a public campaign in terms of educating people about this, I think the more specific you can be, just like a business has to be, around this is the gap between increased expenses and what we're taking in. And we have to come, if you're gonna be opposed to this, come up with your own strategy for how we're gonna get this money, because the only strategy we can come up with at this moment is increased commercial tax base. And in doing that, that's gonna inform some of your land acquisition, some of your decisions around the economic development. Is this going to require more town services and put more of a burden? Or is this going to offset what we've already committed to and allow us to balance the budget? Most people can get around the notion of you have to balance a budget.
Yeah.
You know, you're running your household, you will go bankrupt if you don't. So I find most people do respond well to, listen, we have set a goal for, you know, this is the current commercial tax base revenue. This is where we need to be. And be very specific. This is where we need to be.
And I forget the number right now, but our tax rate, even though some would disagree, is towards the bottom in the state.
Yes, it's
for $100,000 real estate value.
Mm-hmm.
And the census and the master plan, they all line on the data that our population is aging. We've got more people staying in their properties for longer, and they are the people that generally end up on a fixed income of some kind.
Right.
And if we have to come back and say the only way to start balancing these budgets are with, you know, debt exclusions and whatnot and overrides, like no one's going to be happy at all.
Yeah.
So it's either cut services
Yeah.
or find another way.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's the short reality of it, that none of us,
Well, it is.
none of us like.
Right, it is.
It is.
And, you know, that's why someone, you know, like me is sitting here. I mean, I've signed off on the exemptions that the senior citizens can file. I've seen their abatement applications. I've seen their hardship applications because I was on the Board of Assessors. So that's a very real thing for me. And that's another thing, you know, why I make some of the decisions that I do. We have to, but we also, I think, have to do a really good presentation on how the tax rates work. And it is not intuitive subject matter for a lot of people. It's not. I've done all those classes. It is probably one of the least intuitive, you know, things. So,
Yeah, so my encouragement, just as an outsider listening, is to make a goal to be very specific. This is the projected expenditures coming. This is what we have coming in. This is why we're saying 32% increase. This is why there's a reason behind throwing out that number. As just the reality of, you know, and if we're gonna continue giving abatements, we're gonna need to make that 34%.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know I had on one of my biggest strategic plan items was, budget forecasting going out, 3, 5, 10 years. Just to try to get a sense of the landscape, coming in front of us, because all of these things, we may not, see it, but they're all tied into budget forecasting and how you're going to maneuver, and strategize to get to where we want to be. So, it's not looking good. We know that, the budgets are just going to get tighter and tighter. And, with our aging population, there's just no way. I can't go to the taxpayers and ask them for, an override just for operational purposes. I mean, not under the current.
In Canary in the coal mine, a number of towns this year have had to do that. We were fortunate we didn't have to.
Yeah.
We did it through a pretty austere budget, but that's not going to last forever. So your point's very well taken. I mean, Westport right now is about to go to a special election for a $3 million override for operating purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary.
And the override stays forever, unlike a debt
It's not
exclusion,
student,
which,
it's
you
operating.
know, yeah.
Well, look at your core value of accountability. We accept ownership of the services delivered to our community, the operation of our government, and the facilitated outcomes. We believe accountability is all about transparency and accepting responsibility. I think this discussion is about an issue of accountability for the residents and your role in this, you know, and being reality-based. Here's the reality. This is what we're facing, transparency. This is what it is. This is how bad the picture is, and this is our plan moving forward to address it. And I think you will get pushback. You're going to get pushback, but that's where you hold on to. Sorry, we're holding on to our accountability here. We've got to make this number work. You know, you guys want to come up with a better solution, residents come up with a better solution, but economic development is really the only thing that's going to.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't need to be said, but I think we probably should. Nobody is looking to pave the town and develop the whole town.
Right.
I think that's what we want to avoid. Because we're in a situation right now where we have very little control of what's happening.
Yeah.
And developers are coming in and using the state laws as they may to pretty much do whatever they want. We have no control, basically. The zoning board of appeals has minimal control over some of these permits. There are special permit applications coming in front of them. So to get ourselves into a position where we have some kind of guidelines, we have some kind of plan, and we are executing on that in a way that minimizes disturbing what we see out the window here, I think, I would hope is well taken. If they understand that the long-term goal is to keep you in your house because you can afford the bill when it comes in. Or be able to pass that down to your family, whatever it might be, and not have you looking for a way to get out because you can't afford the tax bill anymore. Or you're filing for abatements and now we have to find other sources for that money.
Right, and honestly, the abatements they're not always granted. Most of them are not granted because, you know, it's not justified by the state data. So, you know, folks sometimes are counting on those and then they don't happen and, you know, yeah.
So, Lorraine, you brought up budget forecasting, which it seems like that would be like tied into all of this. You know, maybe not board policies on social media, but just about everything is tied into budget forecasting. How do you want, does the group agree that that is a high priority?
We actually have a multi-year forecast. We can easily provide that to the board.
Yeah,
You actually have that
Oh, yeah,
already.
yeah, we do
Yeah,
that.
I have total confidence in Ari's abilities on providing that for us now that, you know,
I think
if,
it's actually Todd who does that.
yeah, Todd, but, both of your abilities, but, you know, I'm glad Lorraine, you know, suggested that.
It's a good idea to have some
Yeah.
more transparency on that.
I think if we're all interested, I think that could be,
Right.
yeah, something that, and I think that would help the residents too. I
Right,
absolutely,
right.
you know, see her point.
So would that involve like one part of the meeting being the budget, a presentation of the budget forecasting, a discussion around that, and then a discussion possibly on how you want to put that out to the
I would suggest that one possibility, maybe this is too far away from now, but one possibility would be that we make that part of our budget presentation. Maybe it's part of the, but that's like January. It's maybe part of the outlook discussion in the fall, and where we talk about, you know, we talk about things driving the budget, things we wanted, that we're doing, asking about guidance and so on, and we can show projection out of what the various choices look like. It's not hard to do, and then for the actual budget document itself, which is a public document, although actually the forecast is a public document too, but the public is, you know, sort of a landmark document, you know, we can have a forecast in there as part of that as well. That would be helpful, I don't know.
On top of that, I think, I don't know if this is accountability or one of the other values, but as additional educational material, maybe to facilitate some trust from residents, is that we hit on this a little bit during budget review, but not just what the forecast is, not just what we're requesting at town meeting, but then we look back in a little more, I don't want to say transparent because we're not hiding it, but just a little more forthcoming way to say, here's what our performance was on the budgets that we asked for. And we were within whatever the number is.
Right.
And if there's a larger delta, here's why that was. so that hopefully some more trust is gained that, you know, these numbers are accurate based on
You know
prior year's
what?
performance.
So you know what the town's traditionally not done, but other jurisdictions have been and have done this, is done a session, like a work session with the board where we go over the year in performance.
Yeah,
You know, we pretty much when it comes to, I think traditionally, when free cash becomes available, we send you a notice, say, hey, this is the free cash number. But there's really no discussion of what, you know, the audit looked like and what the numbers look like. And I think it's reasonable for the board to expect that there should be some kind of presentation regarding the audit outcome. And that would show, you know, whatever your performance to expense was, performance to revenue, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As part of that, but also we get into the other issues that, you know, we've always had very clean audits, but, you know, if an auditor finds something, you know, whatever can you know, that can be talked about as well. The board should see all of that.
and then that, I think it might help some of the situations we're dealing with now, like say, you know, overtime for fire was up, right? So then that works into why are we asking for additional services in the
Right.
next budget? Because if we're trying to, you know, we don't want to have random overtime, we want to have something that's, you know, predictable. And this is why, we're trying to put this little thing out and handle it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, actually, because we've been reactive with the
Yeah.
fire stuff now. This is the third year, so, and that is one thing that, you know, I kind of had on my list. How do we oversee those types of things? And I think that question is answered by that.
Yeah, I think that's probably overdue, that the board should be seeing that on a regular basis anyway, at least once a year, the audit outcome. I think I'm pretty certain that the audit document had been shared with the board every year. I think Todd does that, but
Yep.
honestly,
But that's the extent of it, though.
that's very
We
dense.
get the document.
It's very dense. It doesn't, you don't really, you know, you're kind of left to your own devices to see what's in there.
Right,
I mean, it really should be it should be more of a proactive conversation, I think.
right.
So I think that.
And again, you know, I just want to say again for the record here that, you know, 20 years ago, the town administrator, well, 20 years ago, I don't even know if we had a town administrator yet. You know, the selectmen used to do, there wasn't the strictness of the open meeting law. There wasn't this, there wasn't that. They used to do this stuff and just get her done, you know?
Yeah.
We have, you know, all these other things, plus growth of the town. I mean, we've hired, you know, new positions and, you know, so now it's time for us to do some of these things. It's not bad that they weren't done before, it's just time to do them
It's where you
now.
are in your development.
Right.
I think what you're doing today is really gonna be very helpful for you as you move. I mean, the ultimate goal of any organization is to move out of reaction and into proactive. To not have, you know, to minimize the amount of surprises. To be able to have a set of guidelines in place for making important decisions, right? So that you're not just winging it each time based on human emotion and who's got the strongest voice. It's a clarity around, you know, seeing the big picture and how it all interacts, you know, budget forecast, actual to projected, you know, knowing how accurate are the numbers, having the public trust the numbers, knowing that this isn't your problem, it's a town challenge to make sure that we're raising enough revenue to cover our expenses. Getting their involvement through being very specific about the way you're educating people, I think builds public trust. It's transparency, it's teamwork in the sense that you're involving the residents in the transparency of the information and what it actually means. And you may get less pushback on issues around economic development, hopefully, because
Well-
they'll see the bigger picture.
Right, and that's one of the last ones that I had on my list is information. So social media is definitely a double-edged sword sometimes, but I think if this board decides that, you know, we should try to do more just factual information, just get it out there. And I don't know what that looks like. This is sort of a, you know, rhetorical question here. Does that mean we say to the town administrator, okay, so, you know, assign a department head for each month where they can put out a factual piece of information about their department. And, you know, and the more we use the social media, the more the town's social media site will get, I'm not saying that we need to, post something every day or, but at least get some of that, we have to try to reach people. But, that's just one of the last things, but I think it ties into everything because we could be doing all this great work with all the department heads and members and, everything else, but, it doesn't really do us any good if we're not disseminating that information to the townspeople. So when we need them to give us their support on, something, they'll already have that they know what we're looking for, what we're asking for. And, there's 12 months of the year. I don't know how many department heads we're up to, but, everyone, and that doesn't put a big burden on, and if someone's busy or on vacation that month, they go to the next person, just some sort of, information out there. Do you know? Yeah, and actually Ari started that with the videos of different departments, and they were very well respected, I know, LakeCAM was definitely helpful in doing that and,
Then we got another one coming out soon.
yeah, and I think people love that. They love knowing the inner workings of what goes on.
Sure.
Like I said, they, sometimes they think we have 10 people working in each office. We don't. We have 2.
How would that, Ari, do you see that falling on you in terms of coordinating that with the department heads? Or John or someone,
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the outreach?
the communication piece?
Yeah, I think that's probably my direction, and we're in a couple of ideas beyond the videos to get out there, social media, little thumbnails about employee spotlights, department spotlights, things like that. And we're thinking a little bit about next steps. I'll be happy to entertain any ideas about that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's something that, other than us making, like a suggestion, I think that's something that's manageable from the town administrator's, office. I think a general consensus that, yeah, we'd love people to have more information. I think, I don't think it's up to me to say, I want the treasurer on there giving us her resume. You know what I mean? I think it's,
Building the connection with the community is
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
incredibly important.
It's getting people aware of transparency.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I apologize if this came up just while I stepped out, but that was a couple of things I had here as well, is like, how can we more consistently get resident input so that we know, like, have their wants and needs changed at all in a time period that we're not able to collect? And then additionally, like, what methods of information do residents like to receive that information over? Like, the Facebook community is shrinking over time. Like, there's other ways of getting it out. So are we doing the right things there or not?
How does the board feel about a town survey?
I was just thinking about that.
I mean, a lot of towns do that. It's a little bit tricky figuring out what that looks like, what the numbers look like. Usually you hire some type of market research firm to do it for you. It costs a little bit of money, but it might be informative. Might get to
Maybe
the silent majority, and all that.
Survey for what?
Community. Well,
How they get their information.
values, how they get their information, what their priorities are, what they're looking to see out of their government, what services are important to them. It could be anything.
I'd be really curious, because we used to have a newspaper, which was helpful, Middleborough Gazette. Now we have the Nemasket, which hits on the main ideas for the week, but I miss having the Middleborough Gazette, which went into detail in some things, and I hope the Nemasket starts, to grow even more. But, I know that I would just be curious, like Brian said, I know, Facebook is shrinking. I'd like to know how folks want, it's impossible to send a mailer to everything. Each mailer is what, $6,000 or something?
Yeah.
You can't send a list every month on, what the hot items are, but I'd really be curious how folks want to get that information.
And I mean, there's even like applications you can get for your phones now where you can register resident accounts, but then are you skewing the results of that to people that are comfortable using devices?
You are.
Right,
Yeah, you definitely
right, I
are.
think
Yeah.
Jose.
Yeah.
I barely even look at my mailbox, so.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Lost my train of thought. The The town has a Survey Monkey account, correct?
Yes.
I know it's not as widespread as the
It's not, it
mailings.
won't be, yeah, it's not scientifically
Does
valid.
the town know how many residents are on those mailing lists? How many of the people on the email lists are town residents versus outsiders?
It's hard to verify.
Hard to verify. You
Okay.
really can't verify that.
Okay, so that's not a valid way
Right.
to restrict the survey
No.
people. This might be a little premature, but you've seen some new people with LakeCAM recently, including David, who left earlier, and Elijah. Both of them have news experience on radio and also in production of news programs. I can't promise that this will come to fruition, but it's been a goal of LakeCAM to provide news, not just on our cable TV channels, but also via social media about the town, what's happened in the last week, what's coming up next week. I purposely hired those two gentlemen for that purpose. It's dangerous for LakeCAM to do this because we're supposed to be impartial, and we do our best to be impartial on every issue that comes up in town or in the regional school district. We've been accused recently of editing school district videos and meetings. We don't. The only time you see a cut in it is we had a technical issue with our equipment. I just wanted to bring that forward, that we are not unaware of the issue of the news desert that is developed.
in Lakeville.
All
Yeah.
right.
We just can't promise that we can have enough resources to make it what the townspeople need and want. That's the issue. Whether the townspeople and taxpayers wish to supplement LakeCAM's budgets on, in particular, the government channel, that's a question for town meeting, and whether the select board wants to bring that question forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No,
needed
I
to
just
bring
want
that up.
to, part of my job is to make sure we don't get so caught in the weeds that we don't step back and look at, it sounds like this is a whole separate topic.
Yeah.
Communications, how you inform the public, how the public wants to be informed, how you're going to interact with that. That sounds like it's a whole other working meeting.
The public has been watching this meeting live on Facebook and on cable TV and has put up a lot of comments already.
Okay, I think we can kind of,
I don't know what they are.
yeah, I think,
The resource is available should we need it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's
Thank
definitely
you.
something we can explore.
Thank you. In the interest of time, because we have less than 10 minutes, you've got some other issues, capital planning, security, ADA compliance, ARPA funding, marijuana
Out of everything
policies.
on that list, and I added a couple more, just other things we've already talked about in meetings, like parks, whatever, especially under the ARPA funding heading there. I think the marijuana policy is the one that's a tough one right now with all the changes, so that I would identify as maybe needing its own time slot, but otherwise, some of those other things, I think we could knock out on one of our regular sort of
Okay.
workshop meetings or
Yeah.
whatever it is we're gonna do. But otherwise, that one's a tough one now because the state's changing.
Right. Would that be also something that would involve HR? Because usually we're getting a lot of, I know that in my world, we get a lot of information about the changes that are going on and, I'm just wondering
Yeah, I
if that's,
think,
that John's probably getting a lot of that same information and.
Yeah, I think what we mean by marijuana policy is how many host community agreements we have with the facilities that
Oh,
are
gotcha.
here in town.
Cultivation and.
Yeah,
That's
free
host,
to
yeah,
go.
it's not employee
It's not
based.
employee based,
I
nope, it's,
understand.
yep,
Not usage.
yeah.
It's not usage, it's
Yeah,
host
it's-
agreements.
Yeah, host
Okay.
agreements, so, and we have several of them, so it's, something that, otherwise, I think, would you guys sort of agree with that most of the other things are ongoing, we could probably knock them out?
They're ongoing. While you were talking, I was trying to figure out, I had another item here, and this gets into like a weird space because it's turned into like different elected boards overlapping or whatnot, but like barely survived COVID thanks to the select board doing subsidization of budgets and stuff, but like parks, right? Parks is a whole area where it's land acquisition if we were to try to find something else. they barely get by in their enterprise fund. Is that if it wasn't for Boston Tavern and that contract, I don't know how things would be
It
going.
wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Right, like, is there more, less, indifferent, I don't know, that the select board of the town should be doing with parks, where they technically run under their own budget? I don't know about the two of you, but I get questions here and there, and like, why don't we have this facility? Why don't we have that facility? They're also in a very reactive state where like most, capital planning that you've got to do, most of the stuff is just maintenance. It's
Right.
never move forward, it's just keeping the flag where it is and in a decent state. I mean, to me, that's something that we get lots of asks on why certain park type things, it doesn't have to be Ted Williams or John Pond or whatnot, but other park-like
Parks, yeah.
things, whether it's Betty's Neck or something else that we come across that we should be looking for.
So the town plan, so Mark Resnick's worked with them a fair amount on assessments and looking at, situation. He's doing it because there's really nobody else to do it. And it's been helpful, but it's just a piece of his job. They really don't have and badly need, right now they kind of run, the Parks Commission really runs the parks like a commission government. Each one of them has a different park that they're responsible for, and they kind of do this, they act like the managers of those parks. And I guess that's the way you have to do it in this situation, but that they really need they really actually need more than just a 12-hour employee or a clerical employee to actually, to really get in there and dig it. I mean, yesterday, it's all a very strange arrangement. Yesterday, I was over by Ted Williams and, Melissa was there. She's there, I don't know,
7 days.
6-8 hours a day. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. I mean, I salute her dedication. It's wonderful. But, she's a volunteer elected official. It's not exactly an ideal situation.
Right, right.
So-
And the reason why they they were able to get as much done as they did was because they had 5 people on the board operating in that capacity.
Yeah.
That's, lots of hours. Well, we don't necessarily have that anymore. Nor do I think that if you want to put your name in for Park Commission, that you should be able to offer 20 hours of labor, a week.
I mean, honestly, that's a little crazy.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it could be time for us to look at a management change as far as parks is concerned, but that's another very emotional issue for the town, so.
I think it would be.
Yeah.
But I personally, because we have this odd interrelationship with like us and the budget, and we use DPW for maintenance, so there's already some of this going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it that the residents feel like we're doing well enough, not well enough, haven't added? You've been approached by outside corporations looking to put investment into the parks, which was turned down. Are there opportunities that we should have taken people up on?
Yeah.
Who
Sounds
makes
like
that-
that's
who
all
makes
part of
that
the
call?
survey process,
Yeah,
right?
like, I
That-
don't know who owns that. Is it select board because it's town property? Or is it
Yeah.
parks running the parks?
It's a very strange gray area because they manage the situation there. They don't have their own procurement authority. It's town procurement. I exercise a lot of deference when I deal with them on procurement issues, but they are under the, not special act, it was a bylaw that was passed, responsible for management of the parks. That's all it says, management of the parks. It's very vague.
Yeah.
So, I think, if you really want to dive into it, you probably want to get council involved in the whole, I don't know if you really want to do that. It's kind of a confrontational approach, so.
I mean, I don't want to be confrontational in the least, but I would be interested if, Leah and Lorraine think that that's another meeting that's worth having, and having it with them and saying like, what's going well, what's not going well? Is there a way to help here or expand? I don't know.
Right.
It's an area that I feel like
Right, and I
needs effort
know,
somewhere.
I have talked to many residents for a long time who don't even know that they're an enterprise fund, and so many residents noticed the difference immediately when the DPW started taking care of the parks. And, they thought we hired, people just to work for the parks, and we're like, no, that was DPW, and
So it sounds like, in the interest of time, because we are running out of time here, just to pull you back together here, it sounds like that maybe, are you guys okay with putting that on as part of the discussion of one of the meetings, as parks and the use of it?
yeah, that one can be a winter one though, I think, 'cause-
It's
The
not.
budget- I think the budget process is a good framework for that as well.
yeah.
Yeah. So what's first? What, of the list that you've given and, the overlaps in discussions, what comes first? Are you going to do the transition to the 5-member select board that we didn't even get to?
Honestly, I don't mean to cut you off, Katie. I think what's first is creating our first workshop meeting and looking at what we want to do.
Well, that's what I'm
next.
asking,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
What is the
But-
first meeting gonna
Right,
look like?
but I think there's a couple of things that are, we definitely need to look at the ARPA money thing. So I feel confident we can, like, we all know these are important. It's
Okay.
like when our Port Town facilities director came in, we said to him, here's 30 things on our list and everyone has to be done tomorrow, you know? And, you know, we kind of been working at it. So I think small progress is probably good progress right now. But I feel like the land one is too much to tackle, but so is the economic development one. So, I guess we have to jump in and,
Well, and you
Yeah.
you did bring out a strategy here for how you're going to develop that. One of the areas you talked about was developing a scoring mechanism for looking at how you make decisions. If you did that alone, if you did that one thing alone, or you were saying, it would make a huge difference. So, you know, my encouragement is, as you're saying, you know, tackle small things. You can tackle big projects or big issues, but take it and put it into manageable bites.
yeah.
You know, so if you get to that first stage where you have a template, a series of questions that need to be answered, that guide your decision-making, that's a big step. That's going to move you into proactive.
I mean, what if our first meeting on these is a distilled version of what we did today, where it's, you know, we literally go in and we just say, all right, transition to a 5-member board. All we want to handle today is, we know it's coming. Ari, you come back with the top 3 things you need guidance from us on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Land use, okay, here's 5 things we think are important. Mark Resnick, town planner, you've got 6 weeks. Come back to us with what you think, and just start to put some deadlines on things to force us to revisit.
Yep.
Otherwise, I think all of us will be scared to try to tackle these.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, because I don't think any one of these things we can tackle just the 3 of us with the town administrator. I think we
No.
need input. So I do think that that's a great idea to give folks, you know, so,
Yeah.
you know, they have they can plan their work. And they know for a fact that what they've been talking about in some cases is actually gonna start happening.
Good.
You know, so I think that'll give them a sense of accomplishment as well.
So one of
We
the,
can always refer to committee on these too,
Right,
and give
right.
people things to do.
one of the things that facilitators typically do at the end of the meeting is ask, because it's helpful feedback for me, you know, each of you, did this align with what your expectations were for today?
She's looking at you, Lorraine.
Do you want someone else to go
I am
first?
looking at you, Lorraine. Did this align with what your expectations for today was?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the discussion, we had, you know, good discussion topics, but I feel like a lot of this was just business as normal, as usual. So I'm looking forward and I'm optimistic that we're going to actually put some of this stuff in play. So that, I think, will be something good to see outcome and achievement.
Good. Okay, that's
So-
helpful. That's helpful. Brian, how about you?
I think it was a great first step. I think it gave us an opportunity to, you know, outside of normal business, to get things out that was very useful and how we process certain things individually. And like Lorraine, I think now that we've taken a little bit of time to build a bit of a framework of what we're gonna go after, now we can have those meetings to really nail down some of the details, or at least start it and get things going. My hope is that as we get through these, Ari and the rest of the organization feel more like they're part of something, and that they can track their own efforts towards aligning with whatever these things we come out of this are.
Okay, great, thanks. Ari, how about yourself?
I agree with Brian, it was a good first step. I also agree with Lorraine, some things that I would have liked to see, would have been a little more clarity in terms of goal setting and what it is that we, you know, we're coming out of this meeting we don't really still don't have established goals. I am, just being selfish here for a moment, I'm 3 months into my 3rd year, 2 months into my 3rd year. And, I don't have goals right now. And that strikes me as sort of the basic blocking and tackling that needs to happen and it's not there. Not being petulant about it, I'm just sort of stating a fact. And that's a challenge for me, it's a challenge for the organization. I can tell you that the goals, when they are approved, every year that they've improved, I have utilized those with the staff and said, these are the things we're focusing on this year.
Yeah,
That's what we're doing. We don't have that right now.
yeah, that's one of your priorities right now, would be to get that.
And it's a very high priority for my relationship with the board.
Yeah, I think, it's a little tricky because the town administrator bylaw says the review process goes according to when they were hired. He was hired in May, which overlaps with a brand new board. So now you have someone potentially next year who has no town experience whatsoever, let's say, coming onto a board for the first time. And here you go, now you have to do a review of the town administrator.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a little bit of the difficulty too. So, and I don't know how we go around that. I think it says you have to have the review done by that time. So maybe we figure out a way where we get it done right before that time. So the outgoing board members or potential outgoing board members, and we can speed up that process because I think that they're combined, and this was the same issue that sort of happened last year too, and the year before. We were constantly delaying. And I respect that point that, Ari's made. So maybe that should be one of our stretch goals here is instead of waiting until May 1st or whatever the higher date is, we work on it, in March before the potential outgoing board members move on.
That makes sense.
Nothing says we can't do it
Early, no.
early.
Or take feedback, I apologize, feedback on when is helpful to set, if it's fiscal year goals or budgetary
Right.
goals or whatever it might be. It might be that an outgoing board member is still required, I say required, we're all elected, right? So we kind of do what we want, I guess, in some ways. You are expected, as part of offboarding, to give a, as of now, review. So at least there's something, instead of just like,
Right.
bye.
Bye, see you later.
Because that was
Right.
me in 2021, right? So
Yep.
I left in April and bye.
Yep.
And then I got elected this time in April and it's like, hi, now I'm doing a review even though I've been on the job for 2 months.
Right, right.
It's not.
And they're all interconnected. I feel like, we've delayed doing the goals because we didn't have the review done and, so I feel like that's something that we
Sounds like
need-
this is a priority.
Yeah, but we
I think the
also,
goals I think the goals can be independent of the review to a certain degree as well.
yeah, but I think we should pick a date and live by it,
Yeah, I think.
which I don't think
Everybody's asking
is,
for specificity here.
Right,
Lorraine,
right.
like, let's get down to this. Just to finish the process, Leah, how did this align with any expectations you had?
so I think the actual talk about the strategic planning, has been helpful. I think we've touched on, I'm really pleased that we've touched on some communication things. Obviously it's been helpful because Ari and I have already had a conversation that, he and I need to, regroup a little bit because we've had a little disconnect. So clearly that's very helpful to me. So,
Yeah, I agree with that.
instead of just sitting in our corners,
Yeah.
which,
Yeah, good. I want to say to you, Lorraine, I really appreciate your comments about, let's get down to something that's concrete. And I also was aware walking in, having met with each of you individually, that this was part of a necessary process to get people moving in the direction. And sometimes that is frustrating because you can have an expectation, okay, we're going to have a really tight plan at the end of 3 hours, but I think you did need this opportunity, in my opinion, to at least talk to each other, work through what your priorities are. And you've got a structure now for getting this done. You at least have the structure. You're gonna set up these meetings and you kind of know what direction you wanna go in.
I just want to say, like, I really enjoyed the fact that we just all sit here and not necessarily have specific business we had to get done and just to be able to talk about topics. I mean, that to me was really energizing. And now I really want to get to these other meetings and
Right.
knock out the specifics and get, start working towards goals.
Yeah.
So just getting to sit here kind of as an off meeting and blah was great.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I think doing this work forward, I really think it'll help eliminate the 3 and 4 hour meetings. Where some of it is just informational, we have to, whoever's working on it has to explain and, whatever. And so it took you 10 minutes to explain it, and then it takes another 10 minutes of conversation, and then someone makes a motion, blah, 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 you're half hour into one item, so, hopefully information going forward will, help speed up that process.
Good.
And you know what, not for nothing, but I don't want a resident who's interested turning off because we're going into our 3rd hour,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just want to thank you guys for all being so forthcoming and, participating and being present for this, and, I wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
appreciate it.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Glad we had you available. All right.
So do we need, I thought there was a possible vote at number 3.
It said discussion consideration possible.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't,
and Cole, I don't think you got to that point, so.
I
yeah.
don't think we need to vote.
Yeah.
You've made a decision as a group that you're going to move forward by meeting.
Yeah.
Possible,
Having
which means
these-
possible. but-
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
yeah,
having these, and I
But I
asked
don't-
about whether you needed to vote on it, and you said no.
yeah,
So-
I don't think we need to make a formal vote.
Just to adjourn.
Well, now there's something else too. We have every board and commission doing something different. Some chairs adjourn the meeting, some folks wait for a motion. Maybe we should put that on our consistency across the town list too.
I will just, for the record, I'll be putting together a memo, which I'll share with the board, obviously ahead of time, about the 5-member board transition, just considerations, things to think about.
Yep,
I think it might be helpful to get the conversation going. Some will be resource, some will be policy, things like that.
sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right, it's 12:10.
Motion to
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.